Let's shuck and go, baby. It's deep dive season. Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the number 32 team in my power rankings heading into the 2025 NFL season, and of course, the beginning of my off-season deep dives, a series where we take a thorough look at all 32 teams, counting all the way up throughout the course of the summer to the number one team in my power rankings. In these videos, we go through off-season changes. We take a look at the coaching staff, what the team's going to look like schematically, both offense and defense. Then we go through the roster, ranking every position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And we wrap up taking a look at the schedule and my win total projections for every team. And today we begin the series with the New Orleans Saints, a team that for the better part of 5 years since Drew Brees and Sean Payton left, this team has felt like a rotting fruit that every offseason Mickey Loomis comes in and tries to squeeze any last juice out of it that he can by ways of unnecessary free agent spending, kicking cap hits into future seasons, trading up and getting aggressive in the draft, trying to milk whatever was left of that old championship team. And we have spent plenty of time voicing our frustrations for them really not doing things the right way. But now here in 2025, with the credit card mostly maxed out and Derek Carr's arm giving out, this team's hand has seemingly been forced into a true rebuild here and doing things the right way. And even if that means this team is going to rank 32 in these rankings heading into the season and presumably lose a lot of football games, I think most Saints fans are ready for this and excited for this. And it's going to be fun to talk about, not just what this means for the existing veterans on this team, but more importantly, who are some of those young core players that they're hoping can help get this team where they want to go multiple years into this sort of new era of Saints football. Now, before we do get started, if you guys could take just a second to hit that like button down below. I know it sounds silly, but it is a free and easy little thing that really does go a long way. It tells YouTube to get this video out in front of other Saints fans and NFL diehards just like you. I really appreciate it. And of course, if you enjoy this video here today, do make sure you subscribe. We've got 31 more of these bad boys coming over the course of the next 3-4 months. And lastly, do make sure you stick around towards the end of the video. We have a first-time Saints deep dive guest here this year, Nick Underhill, one of the best just beat writers covering any team in the entire league, hands down. So really excited to get Nick's insight on some of the heavy-hitting questions left about the Saints team, again, towards the back end of the video here. You're not going to want to miss that. But here we go. Chapter 1 of this deep dive, and chapter 1 really of what Saints fans are hoping is a new era of Saints football in New Orleans as we take a look at their offseason changes. This is really a thing of beauty, in my opinion. For years and years, we've seen these lists for this team, including meaningless free agent signings and big free agent signings and continuing to try to go for it. This being a quiet offseason for New Orleans is as much as any Saints fan could ask for, and this really is a thing of beauty to look at based on everything we've said about this team over the years. But we will start by mentioning the coaching changes. Now we have a whole coaching segment coming up where we can really break this down. But I will say, in terms of whether the coaching will be better in 2025 than it was in 2024, I still think is to be determined. I do like the Kellen Moore signing quite a bit, which we will talk about, but I do think Clint Kubiak did a good job calling the offense for this team last year. But most notably, I have some thoughts on Brandon Staley being hired by this team, being quite possibly the worst staffing move any team made in the NFL this offseason. And to go from Dennis Allen, who had reached the end of his capacities as a head coach, I do still think very highly of him as a defensive mind, and I view this as a pretty substantial downgrade with the defensive coaching, even if you are getting an upgrade on the offensive side of the ball. So still leaving that as to be determined, even if I have some very positive things left to say about the Kellen Moore head coach hire yet to come. But then at quarterback, I said slightly downgraded because Derek Carr only played really the first half of last season, just 55% of the team snaps last year. So he retires and you bring in the second rounder, Tyler Shook. So Derek Carr, in the games he did play, was really efficient by Derek Carr standards. And then you had pretty bad quarterback play for the second half of the year. I think Tyler Shook has a good chance of outplaying what they got from Rattler and Hayner in the second half of the year, but still, I think from a roster perspective, slightly downgraded for now at quarterback. I don't think anybody's going to truly disagree with that. At running back, I'm saying slightly upgraded. They are moving on from Jamal Williams, who hardly played last year, and they got one of the steals of the draft at the running back position, in my opinion, getting Devin Neal in the 6th round. Love that addition. Enough for a 6th round pick to have me say that the room is at least slightly upgraded. And then at tight end, leaving that as neutral, they do extend Juwan Johnson here. That it feels notable. But they did draft Maliki Matevau out of UCLA in the 7th round to come in and compete for a roster spot, really. And then at wide receiver, I'm going to say hopefully upgraded in the sense that Chris Olave, 29% of snaps played last year. Rashid Shaheed, just 26% of snaps played last year. They do bring in Brandon Cooks and lose Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who did ironically play very well for this team last year. But from a health perspective, they are certainly hoping that more snaps from their top 2 wide receivers there will leave this group upgraded, but that is, of course, not a guarantee. And then on the offensive line, this is the truly upgraded unit of this entire team. Love that Kellen Moore, coming from having that Philadelphia Eagles offensive line, comes in and they draft Kelvin Banks with that number 9 overall draft pick. But not just that, Eric McCoy, their star center, only played 27% of the team's snaps last year. They also go and get Dylan Raduns, who started for the Titans last year. So 3 key additions there, and their losses aren't anything too concerning. Lucas Patrick actually played okay for them last year, but I don't think anybody's going to panic about that. He played half of their team snaps last year. And then Connor McGovern, who did fill in valiantly in about a third of the season for Eric McCoy at center there, is currently not back with the team either. But upgrades along the offensive line, to say the least. But then you can really feel the sort of lack of additions for this Saints team when you turn things over to the defensive changes here. Just not a whole lot of additions outside of Justin Reed. We'll get there, but on the interior of the defensive line, they lose nobody. They did add Devon Godshaw. It's a very minor rotational add. I think it was like a 7th round pick swap to get him in as a part of that D-line rotation, but then they spent a 3rd round pick on Vernon Broughton. So that interior D-line should be slightly upgraded. And then on the edge, not very busy. They say goodbye to their former 1st round bust of an edge rusher in Peyton Turner and draft Fadil Diggs in the 7th round out of Syracuse. Another nice value, in my opinion. So leaving that as neutral. Neutral as well at linebacker. They say goodbye to veteran Willie Gay and add Danny Stutzman in the 4th round to develop in that veteran linebacker group. But then the big downgrade for this team is going to be at cornerback, losing both Paulson Adebo and Marshawn Lattimore, who was traded near the deadline last season. You know, those guys didn't play a ton for them last year. Adebo played close to 40% of snaps. Lattimore played pretty close to a third of the team's snaps. But even if those guys did miss a lot of time, those are very talented players and big names to replace in that secondary group that they haven't really done much to address at this point in time. Isaac Yiadom gets brought back after he was here in 2023, but then went to the Niners in 2024. A bit of a Band-Aid free agent re-signing, if you will. And then they did draft Quincy Riley out of Louisville in the 4th round, but I don't think anybody's going to argue with that group being downgraded for now. And then at safety, the one position that they did spend at was Justin Reed at safety. That was the one move where it's like Mickey Loomis just couldn't help himself. He had to spend somewhere. I still think for this team to spend really any cap space, probably unnecessary, because they are still trying to get negative cap off the books. And it's not just adding his $10 million salary for the next 3 years. It's any sort of rollover cap that you can create by not spending money to really set your team up for future success. But all that said, there are some positives here. Justin Reed for 3 years, $30 million. I mean, I think he's a better player, for example, than like Cam Bynum, who got $15 million, and even like Trayvon Merrick in this division got like $17 million. From a value perspective, with how the safety market has gone up, Justin Reid is a nice player. He's only 28, so there's a chance if you're good in 2027, you maybe could still get one good, meaningful year out of Justin Reid. And it's one $30 million, one 3-year $30 million contract is not going to offset an entire offseason where pretty much everything else was leaning towards a true rebuild here. But still interesting that they spent money on him. And then they also spend a 3rd-round pick on Jonas Sanker, which another sort of half criticism of signing a guy like Justin Reid is he is going to be kind of a roadblock for a young player like a Jonas Sanker to get on the field and develop into the player they're going to want him to be in 3 years. But still a nice investment there in the 3rd round. I would have gone with Xavier Watts, who ends up going to division rival Falcons a couple picks later. We'll track that over the years. But then they do lose Will Harris, who, for whatever it's worth, as I was prepping my film studies for this team's deep dive, I thought Will Harris played all right for this team last year. It's not a nothing burger of a loss, but I do think Justin Reid's the better player. And then they're going to run it back with the same specialists. So there is your offseason. It's definitely a youth movement in New Orleans, hoping to get some younger players some playing time and start to clear up the books a little bit, which is definitely for the better. Now, before we go to the coach and scheme breakdown, I do want to thank the sponsor for today's video, SeatGeek, the #1 ticketing app out there. They have been an awesome partner to work with over the years. And if you've been following this series and this channel for a long time, you maybe used an older code of mine working with SeatGeek, but they have now re-upped my code to TFG10. So if you've used an older code, this one will work again for existing SeatGeek customers. And of course, any new customers can save up to $20 on whatever event you want to go to next. The NFL just released their schedule, so if you're planning which games you want to go to this fall, you want to get the best prices and save the extra $20 with that promo code, you can do that with code TFG10. We're in full swing with baseball season, summer concerts. We still got NBA playoffs going, so guys, SeatGeek has the best app, the best user interface. They color code every seat so you know exactly what sort of value you're talking about. Just look for the green dots and you know you're getting the most bang for your buck. They give you images of what your seats are going to look like at every individual venue. Every time I buy tickets, I do it on SeatGeek, a proud partner of this channel. So that is code TFG10 and you will save up to $20 on your next purchase. But let's now get into the coach and scheme breakdown for the Saints. Of course, talking about now first-year head coach Kellen Moore coming over from the Philadelphia Eagles. And man, this is a really good head coach hire for the Saints, a team that, because of all the things we've talked about, because of the state of this roster, I wasn't sure how much they were going to be able to appeal to a legitimate, head coach candidate, one of like a legitimate guy that has been in your sort of top 5, top 10 head coach candidates lists now for the better part of 2 or 3 years. To attract a guy like Kellen Moore to this Saints team was a huge win for this organization. And the only thing I'm begging of Saints fans and Mickey Loomis and ownership is please trust the process. Trust that, yes, things are going to be rough for a year, maybe 2 years. But don't make the mistake other NFL teams have done in years past, where if the results don't come immediately, they pull the plug before a guy like Kellen Moore can really start to implement his plan and get the team going. So that's all I'm really asking out of the Saints with this hire. But I am cautiously optimistic that that is their approach here and how things are going to go. And Kellen Moore really lines up with what I believe and what the league has really told us teams should value in a head coach candidate. It's hard to say above all, but potentially above all, and that is to try to find the young, ascending, offensive-minded head coach. It's an offensive league, and to have a coach that can legitimately elevate your quarterback, elevate your offense, that is a bit of a cheat code in the NFL. But it's not just that. It is contrary to these teams that have CEO or defensive-minded head coaches where things might line up and you might have a great staff for a year or two, but The second your offensive coordinator proves he's great, Brian Daboll, Kyle Shanahan, the list goes on and on and on. You become subject to losing your play caller and your offensive designer and having to start back from square one. So if you're talking about trying to set your team up for long-term, year-to-year success and sustainability, getting the offensive-minded head coach, and preferably a younger one like Kellen Moore, who does have modern thinking and brings creative ideas to the table, is going to be your best path to realistic success. Not the only path to realistic success, but probably the best path. And I love that for the New Orleans Saints for all of those reasons. And I do think Kellen Moore has earned his praise as one of these ascending offensive minds. You go back to what he did in Dallas, really calling the offense for Mike McCarthy, had, Dak Prescott in that offense. The best versions of those offenses were under Kellen Moore. And then just as Jerry Jones and Cowboys fans in Dallas are looking for a scapegoat, Kellen Moore says, screw you guys, I'm out of here. Overnight basically tells Mike McCarthy, you're not firing me, I'm leaving. And he goes to take the job with Justin Herbert and the Chargers, goes there for a year. That, I would say, was a somewhat inconsequential season, not a bad year, not a great year. But then last year lands in Philadelphia, and the obvious success they had there ends up getting him this opportunity in New Orleans. So I think he definitely checks a lot of boxes in terms of his accomplishments and being worthy of being hired as a head coach for his offensive prowess. And now we get to see as well what sort of leadership qualities he can bring to the table as well. I think as a very young coach, he's still, 35? Just turned 36. A reason he hasn't, I think, gotten that head coaching opportunity quite yet is because he still has a lot to prove and show in regards to, can you do all of the other stuff? Can you put a good staff together? Can you come up with a cohesive game plan for your team on all three sides of the ball? Can you put practices together and run the team? Like, there is more to just calling plays to being a head coach. And now he gets to kind of show what all he's learned in these different spots, and what he can bring to the table from a leadership perspective, as much as being a play designer as well. So a very worthy candidate in terms of ranking Kellen Moore. Last year I didn't even rank the rookie head coaches. It ended up kind of jading the rankings a little bit, where you had some of those veteran coaches that I really don't think very highly of still ranking like 24th, 25th. I didn't really like that. So I am going to go back to ranking rookie head coaches. They're obviously going to come in towards the bottom because they just have a lot to prove. But even for Kellen Moore to rank 28th when he hasn't coached yet, that is ahead of some of the other rookie hires and even some existing veteran head coaches in my mind. And then in terms of the offensive coaching grades, ranking 14th to 20th for pass game coaching and 19th to 27th for run game coaching. Again, still pretty good for a young coach that you fully anticipate that he's going to kind of climb in how we perceive him and how he ranks in an exercise like this in his time here in New Orleans. Now, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about his schematic background and what this Saints offense could look like here. So Kellen Moore very much comes from more of a classic pro-style, balanced offensive approach. He spent a ton of time with Scott Linehan, both as a player and as a coach in Dallas. But Linehan absolutely comes from, very much a classic, at least by modern standard, it's a classic pro-style offense where they actually will go under center. They are a north and south run game. They do have three-step quick game implemented to their passing attack. You don't see a ton of that in the modern NFL, but in this coaching tree, you do still see that. And then more of the same with Mike McCarthy, who he coached alongside really in 2020 through 2022. McCarthy maybe in 2005 was a young, innovative offensive mind, but by modern standards, Mike McCarthy, again, is very much a classic pro-style offense. So that's kind of his education source, if you will. And then he, of course, has had his own time designing offenses and showing what he wants to do. I think most notably what we saw with the Chargers showed us when he drew up his offense, that is what it looked like. It was a pro style offense with Justin Herbert, very much so. And then he goes to Philadelphia, and that's what the whole offseason was before last season was, okay, Kellen Moore's coming in. He's going to teach Jalen Hurts, a lot more quick game and full field progressions and get into more of a balanced, pro style passing attack. And unfortunately, not even trying to throw shade at Jalen Hurts, but for the first 5 weeks of last season in Philadelphia, it was kind of a disaster. And they ended up completely reshaping the offense, kind of going back to what had worked in years past with much more of a Shane Steichen sort of modern pro spread style, where it's all shotgun and 2x2 formations and read options and a lot of that kind of stuff. And Kellen Moore hadn't run a ton of that really. But even if Shane Steichen was very likely involved with kind of re-implementing that playbook in Philadelphia again around that week 5, week 6 period, it was still impressive that Kellen Moore was the one pushing those buttons and was more than comfortable really adjusting the plays he's calling, the scheme he's running. And I'm also excited to see what those influences could do to the more classical pro style scheme that he's used to. And honestly, you put those two things together with a north and south under center offense, a pro style system, and some spread philosophies that he got in Philadelphia last year. You put those two things together and you're kind of starting to describe a Sean Payton style offense, which is very ironic with Kellen Moore coming to New Orleans here. So I'm excited to see what all, he wants to put together. How much does he want to lean into some of the spread stuff? How much does he want to go under center? Pin and pull his guards and be, do some of that classic pro style stuff. It's going to be fun to see. And it's not a bad thing, by the way. Like, we spend so much time talking about Shanahan style offenses, these teams that want to run wide zone and then use the threat of play action off of that, this idea of marrying the run and pass and kind of make everything look the same inside that Shanahan tree, which is something Saints fans got very familiar with last year with Kubiak's system. It's certainly not a bad thing to be more of a multiple, versatile offense that I think maybe doesn't have that kind of meta go-to easy button for your offense, but is able to game plan more specifically for what defense they're facing any given week, is able to adjust perhaps a little bit better within a game because you can vary your run game. You can be a power run game one week, a wide zone run game the next week. You can draw play action deep shots one week and be a quick game oriented passing game the next. That's a good thing to be multiple like that. And I think Kellen Moore has shown he can handle all of that. So very excited for Kellen Moore coming in as the head coach, as the offensive play designer here. We don't really need to spend too much time on the de facto offensive coordinator here in Doug Nussmeier, other than the fact that his son is the quarterback for the hometown LSU Tigers and a potential top quarterback in next year's draft that just maybe the Saints are considering, depending on how everything plays out here. So that's a potentially fun narrative. But Doug Nussmeier has been a Scott Linehan guy, just like Kellen Moore was. And then obviously got to know Kellen Moore, working with him for all of those years in Dallas. And then he's followed Kellen Moore around with the Chargers and the Eagles. So, a guy that's a more experienced coach and a nice kind of left-hand man for Kellen Moore that he's clearly comfortable with. So a fine enough hire. And maybe if things go really, really well here, he's a guy that might get his opportunity one of these days. But unfortunately, my tone changes quite dramatically here as we talk about the defensive coaching coming in here with Brandon Staley as the defensive coordinator. I said it earlier, but this to me is the worst individual staff move that any NFL team made this offseason. I am firmly betting against Brandon Staley's success here for the Saints, and I would even go as far as saying that this is a major red flag as you think about does Kellen Moore really understand how to build the right staff for this team? This is a brutally terrible decision to hire Brandon Staley. And long-term viewers of this channel know my frustrations with a long list of Vic Fangio tree disciple defensive coordinators that all around the year 2020 started getting hired because of the success of Vic Fangio and what that quarters-heavy system was doing to the league at the time. All of these guys started getting jobs and basically acted like Vic Fangio had just discovered a cheat code with his system and then didn't really have to adjust or even understand the weaknesses in Vic Fangio's system and how to protect against those weaknesses. So if you aren't familiar, I will paint a quick snapshot here of what this system is all about. But I did make a video 3 years ago all about this, and it's crazy that to this day, after how well that video has aged, we're still talking about Brandon Staley getting jobs here in the NFL. But that is, I think, my most proud piece of work, both describing what the Fangio system is, what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are, and pointing out how all of these coordinators that at the time had jobs that have all since been fired until Brandon Staley here again gets another opportunity. I really encourage you guys do check that video out if you haven't seen it yet, but I think a lot of you guys watching this video have seen that and know exactly what I'm talking about here. But basically trying to keep things condensed here, Vic Fangio's system, at the core, the philosophy of that defense is to run a pre-snap, two-shell, quarters pre-snap look, where you have two safeties in a nickel defensive front, about 10 to 11 yards deep, both at an even alignment, showing quarters coverage, cover 4, pre-snap. And then when the ball is snapped, the idea is those safeties could rotate anywhere. They could stay in cover 4. You can get into cover 6, which is quarters on one half of the field, and cover 2 on the other half of the field. You can rotate into cover 3, where one of those safeties is buzzing down and rotating single high, or likewise cover 1. And the idea here is that by keeping your safeties deep, you will prevent explosive plays, and by rotating them, you will try to cause confusion and hopefully force a bad mistake or two out of the quarterback where they misread the alignment of your safeties and feed the ball into the teeth of defense where you can intercept it. At the core, it's a good philosophy, right? But that system comes with serious weaknesses. Number one, you have to live really in a nickel defense, because if cover 4 is going to be your core coverage, you can't really run cover 4 from a base defense, being 3-4 or 4-3, because you're going to ask either a defensive end or an outside linebacker to have to cover slot wide receivers in challenging coverage alignments. That's not really something you can do. So you kind of have to live in nickel, which makes your defense lighter and more spread out. And then on top of that, being in a pre-snap cover 4 look is going to mean you are coming out in a squishy pre-snap off coverage look, where these speed outs and bubble screens and quick passes can be had all day if the offense is smart about it. So we have seen this wave back towards the run game in the NFL. Teams are saying, all right, if everybody's going to come out in pre-snap quarters and nickel defense, there's a reason the last 2 years have been the highest yards per attempt in the history of the NFL. And these types of systems have really, really failed. And Vic Fangio, the king of this system, actually understands the weaknesses in his systems. If it's 3rd and 2, he's not going to come out in a squishy cover 4 look. He does mix in blitzes and man coverage and different things so that you don't just always know how to attack these defenses. And in the case of Brandon Staley, and any Chargers fan will tell you this, he runs a predictable, soft, squishy, timid defense that is an infuriating product to watch. And there are just very few signs that he really has defensive guru or high-level prowess as a defensive mind, outside of, he got to coach behind Vic Fangio and then ran a Rams defense that had Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald on it. He went to the Chargers, and it was a mess. That was one of the ugliest head coach hires in recent memory. And then even when he got fired by the Chargers, I was still open to the idea that, okay, he can't handle being a head coach, but maybe learning from his failures, being a defensive coach again, he can make some adjustments and get better at this. So he goes to the Niners last year in kind of this weird undefined role, but he was in many ways their defensive head coach, or at least assistant defensive head coach next to Sorensen there. And the Niners had the worst run defense they've had in about 10 years, to the point that the Niners' entire draft philosophy was to come out and draft all these like high floor, low ceiling run defending defensive linemen and said never again. Literally everywhere Brandon Staley has been for the last 4 or 5 years has been one of the lousiest run defenses in the league. And it's not like that Niners pass defense did much either. So I think very lowly of Brandon Staley. And to me, this is just a really underwhelming decision, presumably by Kellen Moore here and company. But this is ultimately something Kellen Moore would have had to sign off on. This is a very frustrating decision that this is who he wanted to run his defense. It's frustrating for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's just lacking the foresight of what he's actually accomplished and if this is someone you want orchestrating your defense. But number two, it's like he's seeming like, to me, it feels like the only reason Brandon Staley is getting this job is because it's like, if you're Kellen Moore, well, you hired me, therefore I should hire you. And that's just lazy. And those types of hires fail all the time in the NFL. So I hate this. The Saints, to me, rank dead last in both pass defense and run defense coaching. I'm extremely pessimistic about this hire. And the only thing that excites me about this is getting to see who might get the defensive coordinator opportunity for the Saints in a year or two. I really hope I'm wrong. I really hope Brandon Staley has learned how to properly call a defense, but I am really not prepared to bet on that sitting here today. So unfortunately, we do end on a negative note there, but it is now time to get into the good stuff. Like I said in the intro, it is about shucking time to break down this roster, of course, starting with this quarterback room with rookie second round pick Tyler Shough and Spencer Rattler here as well. Now, even though I am a huge fan of Tyler Shough, I thought I was borderline crazy when I made my quarterback rankings video in February and put a second round grade on Tyler Shough, said this is my QB3 in this draft, and really went to bat for a 25-year-old one-year breakout wonder that at the time essentially nobody was talking about. He was like consensus QB 11 at the time. He was the last guy I watched, and I was like staying up late questioning if I should rank this guy ahead of Shedeur Sanders because I liked him that much. Ended up not pulling the trigger, left him as QB3. But even as someone that is a big fan of Tyler Shough, and I cannot wait to see this happen, the Saints do still rank, and I think very fairly so, as the 32nd ranked quarterback room in the league. That by no means has to be set in stone. These are rankings as we head into the season, and of course the hope is Tyler Shough can outplay this and start to maybe climb up 10 spots as the year goes on and reach a point where maybe he is the 22nd best quarterback in the league by season's end. But I don't think anybody's really going to argue with this ranking here with them in last place. And it's obviously a core reason why the Saints as a team come in 32nd. But the more I've thought about this pick with Tyler Shough with the 40th pick in the draft, I really like the selection for the Saints. I think this really makes a ton of sense. This might be the most, well, I can't say it's the most ideal landing spot for Tyler Shough, but it's up there because the opportunity is going to be so great for him. We'll talk about this roster and if it's a good enough team to help him have success. But I do think for the Saints, who realistically had to do something at quarterback. As much as you want to talk about tanking and all this stuff, you just can't realistically go into the year with Spencer Rattler, with a rookie head coach. That's just a really tough sell to your locker room when you're also trying to evaluate young players and build things in the right direction. As fun as it is to talk about, yeah, we got to get the number 1 pick, we got to hope there's a great quarterback next year, they did realistically have to do something, whether it was going to be drafting a quarterback or signing a veteran. And I think outside of this team getting Cam Ward, Tyler Shough makes the most sense out of any quarterback in this draft for where the Saints are at. Let me explain. Reason number 1, he is a 25-year-old quarterback who is coming into the league with pro-ready processing by college standards. In my opinion, the best footwork out of any quarterback in this draft. He gets to read one with his feet at the top of his drop, pointed in the right direction, ready to throw if it's open. But if it's not there, okay, no problem. The feet snap, the head snap to read number 2, ready to throw to that. You don't get that from a lot of young rookie quarterbacks, because Tyler Shough, not necessarily young at 25 years old. But at least that age went to good use, developing pro-ready processing coming out. So if you were going to take a quarterback with the idea that we want to find out this year if he's good, if you're talking about Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, even to an extent Shedeur Sanders, they, to me, weren't quite as pro-ready as Tyler Shough, at least from a technique and processing evaluation. So realistically, Shough is a guy that can come in, compete for a starting job as a rookie, and if you put an okay situation around him, you're giving him the opportunity to really show you if he's going to be competing to be your franchise quarterback and if you need to draft a quarterback next year. So that's reason number 1. Pro-ready quarterback in a spot where they needed someone that can step in and play right away. Number 2, I think you can make a very good argument that Tyler Shough actually has the best upside out of any quarterback in this draft not named Cam Ward. The other guy would be Jalen Milroe, who's much more of just a wide-range boomer bust guy, and he certainly is not ready to play in year 1, so wouldn't have made as much sense for the New Orleans Saints. But Tyler Shough has arguably the strongest arm in this draft class. He's a good athlete. He's got 4.6 speed. He's not much of a designed run threat. He's not a creative, shifty runner or anything like that. But when he takes off and run, like, he has legit ability to beat you. If you run man coverage and you give him escape lanes, he had 20, 30, I think like up to like a 48-yard run at Louisville. Like, he will beat you with his legs. And I actually think his pocket presence, the way that he generally manages the rush and steps up and mitigates pressure to extend plays inside and out of the pocket, is as good as any quarterback in this draft not named Cam Ward. And that as well gives him legitimate upside as a passer. He's accurate. I love that he showed in his time in college that he is able to work at his game and get better. And he also transcended, in my opinion, the worst surrounding cast out of any quarterback prospect in this year's draft. Horrible offensive line and a group of wide receivers, none of which got drafted, that were dropping balls left and right, many of which ended up in the hands of the defense. And I know I'm putting my salesman cap on here and really trying to sell you on the best case scenario upside here. I'm going to talk about his weaknesses that need to get figured out and cleaned up here. But if you can weed those things out and highlight what he does best, I do think he has legitimate franchise quarterback upside. I do. And that's obviously a huge reason why getting that in the second round makes sense for the Saints. Number 3 is more of a transition towards the floor and the weaknesses. The number 3 reason this pick makes a ton of sense for the Saints is that if his weaknesses do prove to be huge problems at the next level, he is probably going to suck, and the Saints are going to lose a bunch of games. And this wasn't such a high draft pick that they can't just move on in a year and take a guy at the top of the first round next year and feel really good about that path too. So I think this pick makes the utmost sense for the New Orleans Saints. But the reason his floor is pretty low is a couple key reasons. Number one's pretty simple, and it's that this is a guy that before last year at Louisville had 3 straight season-ending injuries and has got to prove that he can stay out there and stay on the field. So if he gets hurt, there's your floor, him not being there, right? So that's very self-explanatory. But the other reason his floor is pretty low is because of what that history of injuries has done to his game. He is one of the weirdest quarterbacks I've ever evaluated, in the sense that we had all of those things to praise. And when he's on, like I said, his upside is that of a franchise NFL quarterback. But I don't know, 5%, 10% of the time, it's like he's got a devil on his shoulder reminding him of all these injuries, and he gets timid and literally plays like he's afraid to get hit. And it shows up in a big variety of different ways. It shows up in him getting extremely check down happy. And he had just hideous, dangerous checkdowns where he's flipping to the ball to the defense, getting sacked and just blindly throwing it to his check down. And some of those are impressive plays. Some of them are laughably bad, like some of the worst plays you'll ever see from a quarterback. It's like Nathan Peterman type stuff, some of these plays. But you'll also see him at times throw off his back foot. If a blitzer gets in, he might not stand in there and deliver the ball. I think you see it in his processing at times show up where, there's times where he will let those deep posts and deep outs develop and make these big time throws. But there's other times where he's not trusting his protection, not trusting his receivers, and kind of taking underneath options in his progressions sooner than he needs to. There are just so many timid moments in his game that show up at frustrating times that it just terrifies you about him as a quarterback. But it's crazy because I praised him for his pocket presence. The Notre Dame game especially, like you watch him earlier in that game, he's navigating the rush. He's making exciting throws on the run. You turn on the Clemson game, he's bullying through defenders, trucking his way into the end zone. The majority of his tape does not show this guy that's scared of contact and, is afraid of pressure and doesn't know how to manage the pocket. It's just, it creeps in. He gets this pocket trauma kind of cold streak to him, and it's scary to watch. So the hope is, honestly, like giving him a better surrounding cast, better coaching with the New Orleans Saints, hopefully, than what he had at Louisville. Another year removed from injury, with a guy like Kellen Moore to really be, in his ear and coach him up, get him to play confident. If you can get the 90% of tape that is great tape from Tyler Shough, if you can get that 99 to 100% of the time, I see a lot of shades of someone like Dak Prescott. I even wrote down he reminds me of dollar store Diet Coke Joe Burrow, just in the way that he moves and some of his strengths and the pocket presence, some of the throws on the run. I'm not saying he's going to be Joe Burrow, but do I see a guy that, if everything comes together, could someday be a top 10 to 12 quarterback in the league? I don't think it's impossible. And maybe I'm overselling him, but that is the upside I see in a guy like Tyler Shough, with the obvious downside as well. Ultimately, really do love this pick for the Saints, and I am stoked to see what he's got. Now, there is the question of, is he the week 1 starter? To me, because of everything we've said, because this team needs to get their answer on Tyler Shough, who they spent the 40th pick on, to me, that signals that they are leaning heavily towards he's going to be the guy. He's going to be out there week 1, and we're going to take a year to see what he's got. And I also think giving him those reps in practice to get him ready for week 1, even if he is a 25-year-old quarterback, making sure he's getting the majority of reps is only going to help him. But at the same time, I don't think they want to just slam the door shut on Spencer Rattler. I do think he's going to have an opportunity to show the Saints what he's got. There are good reports early in camp here. To me, this would take a 99th percentile, best case scenario offseason development from Spencer Rattler, where in the first month of camp, it has become abundantly clear that he has reached his upside as the, former number one recruiter, whatever he was. And, he's really locked in and he's fully grasping this offense. And it is like night and day that he is better than Tyler Shough. Like, he needs to shatter expectations to then get to training camp in August where it's like a 50-50 battle where he might win it. Like, that's the trajectory. What I would anticipate is that Shough gets better over the course of minicamp. And then as preseason week 2, week 3 rolls around, they're really ramping it up. He's been named the starter and he's getting all of the first team reps. That's what I anticipate, barring a true surprise from Spencer Rattler, who we did get to see last year. He did get that opportunity as a rookie, and it wasn't pretty, man. It was not pretty. As you would expect with him in his game, some highs, but a lot of lows, bad decisions, missing reads, bailing out of clean pockets. He just doesn't have the processing, accuracy, pocket presence that a Tyler Shough has, in my opinion. So fully anticipating it is Shoughing time for the New Orleans Saints. And also, by the way, not Jake Haener time. He, to me, has always screened backup and will be around as a QB3 option for them. Again, they rank 32nd for now. But I do think as we now are going to talk about the weapons and the offensive line, if this is a capable infrastructure for the Saints in year one for Tyler Shough, I think he could play like the maybe 20th to 22nd best quarterback in the league as a rookie, earn this job. If that happens, the Saints are probably going to win enough games where they might not be considering a quarterback at the top of next year's draft. And he could be shaping up to be more of a franchise type of player for them. Again, best case scenario there. Worst case is he sucks. The Saints are picking number one and they can move on next year. And there's your quarterback breakdown. But like I said, let's now talk about who these quarterbacks have to throw to here with the weapons. And this was a tough group to rank because your top 2 playmakers here have serious durability questions in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. So the Saints, to me, got a B- grade, which puts them 23rd to 26th in the league. Would have been probably closer to the top 20 if you could guarantee me a season of health for Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, which just isn't the case. Chris Olave has serious concussion concerns at this point, and Rashid Shaheed has missed a lot of time over the last 2 years, especially last year playing, under a third of the team's snaps. So that does need to be factored into me, and that really is a huge variable for this early chapter of this new Saints regime. It's going to impact a lot of things. It's going to impact, I think, how good Tyler Shough can play and how much of that confidence he can build up. At the same time, it's going to impact how many games this team is winning and if they're considering a quarterback next year. And then if these guys can stay healthy, it's going to impact an extension for Chris Olave, an extension for Rashid Shaheed, and whether or not they need to address this group of playmakers into the future. So the health of Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed just damn well might be the biggest variable for the Saints this season. But when these guys are out there, man, I love this 1-2 punch. They're a little bit skinny, so you lack some of that play strength element with this group, but a ton of separation, a ton of speed. You start with Chris Olave, who, easily in the conversation for the top 10 route runners in the league. I think he's probably closer to 5 than he is 10. He's got the speed. He's got the quick feet, easy hips. When he turns on a corner route or an out route, he's so much more fluid than so many of the DBs trying to cover him. He can stack you vertically, can beat you over the top on posts and go balls, but can stop on a dime and beat you on the intermediate route on a hitch or breaking inside on a dig. And he's awesome in the short game as well. He can beat press. He's got quick feet to do that. Really the true definition of a number one wide receiver in the sense that he can beat you to all 3 levels of the field. And then he's started to take even that next step when he's been available towards being more of a true alpha type of wide receiver in the sense of, okay, he doesn't just get open and contribute to all three levels of the field, but he can, I mean, man, he's been like a dominant ball winner in recent games as well. His ability to be kind of a contested catch target to me was always something that was reducing of his upside coming out as the 11th pick in the draft. I liked him a lot, but I wasn't sure that he was ever going to even be as good as I view him today. You know, coming out of Ohio State, that wasn't a huge strength for him. And even in his rookie season, he was 8 for 24 on contested catches. That was at 33%. So that all added up for a guy with a slender frame and not the biggest frame either at 6'1". But 2023 started to get better at that. 40% is very solid for a number one wide receiver. Nothing special, but certainly better than 33%. But last year, man, really showed not just the stats, 6 for 9 on contested catch targets in his, 8 games last year. That's at 67%. But just the film of it all, the ability to elevate and attack the ball and out physical DBs. Some smaller wide receivers do just get it. Tyreek Hill, Antonio Brown come to mind. Like, these are guys that you can put the ball in the air and they'll go find a way to come down with it. Another guy like Stephon Diggs has kind of transcended his frame in that sense. Chris Olave really showed that on tape last year, and that gets you really freaking excited. And excited for the idea that if he could just stay healthy, you might even put an up arrow on Chris Olave and say, can this guy take a next step and be a bona fide top 8 wide receiver in the NFL, which maybe doesn't sound amazing, but you got to contextualize just how many unbelievable alpha wide receivers there are in the league today. To become a top 8 guy is like really rare territory. But again, the tragic news of this is like, if he gets one more concussion, you are worried about 40-year-old Chris Olave being a healthy human being. So it's a sensitive subject, of course, just praying that he can stay healthy and we get to see the best version of Olave for himself as he's fighting for a contract for the Saints and the direction they want to go in. And for a guy like Tyler Shook as well, to have someone like Chris Olave out there is going to be huge for him. And then you got Rashid Shaheed, who, again, when he's out there, top 5 true deep threat in the league, I don't feel scared to say that. Legit speed, but a lot of guys have the speed. You also need the ability to track the ball over the shoulder, to adjust your speed, to run under the ball, and to catch the football. Shaheed, generally speaking, has very good hands for a true deep threat type of guy. And him just in that role with a Chris Olave next to him, that alone makes him very valuable. He alone forces defenses to keep safety help over the top. It opens things up for a guy like Chris Olave to catch all these digs and intermediate routes that he dominates at. And it opens things up for the run game as well, keeping defenders out of the box. So having a guy like Shaheed as that true deep threat is kind of a cheat code for an offense when he's healthy. So I love that 1-2 punch. Unfortunately, you could make a case that after their top 2 guys, the Saints are one of the worst groups of wide receiver 3 through 6 in the league. Maybe not quite the worst, but they're down there. They bring in Brandon Cooks. I hate the saying he is what he is, but it does apply to Brandon Cooks. He's a shell of his former self, someone that was, welcome back, former first-round pick for the Saints, but he's not the Brandon Cooks that Saints fans remember. He's not going to line up outside and stack corners vertically and be this dynamic deep threat. He's kind of turned into this savvy, undersized veteran wide receiver where he's got solid hands, he runs good routes, he plays through contact, pretty limited after the catch though, and again, not really much of a vertical threat at this stage in his career. And I list him as the wide receiver 3, but I do think he is going to spend a lot of time rotating with these various options. And I almost wonder if his skill set as a smaller, more route running focused player leaves him as a more of a backup to both Olave and Shaheed, knowing that both these guys have had a hard time staying on the field, where he's there to replace either of those guys and be a starter if need be. But really, if everybody's healthy, I wonder if he, from a snap count perspective, is going to be this team's wide receiver 3, because you have a bunch of other different body types that frankly make more sense alongside Olave and Shaheed if you're looking for more complementary skill sets. And the first guy I want to talk about there is actually Juwan Johnson, who, out of respect to him, who's bulked up and learned how to block and can survive sometimes as an inline tight end, out of respect to the work he's put in there and earning that contract extension, I will still call him a tight end. But I do think inside Kellen Moore's offense, given where the other tight ends are and who these receivers are, I would set the number at about 85% of Juwan Johnson's snaps, I believe, will be as some form of a receiver in the slot or in bunch formations, even in 3-by-1 formations, as an outside wide receiver with your 3 wide receivers on the trip side. To me, Juwan Johnson is a starting slot wide receiver for this team who might come in and play some 12 personnel tight end off the wing. I was very tempted to just list him as a wide receiver, but I'm not going to do that. But I would be interested if you could set a line at who gets more wide receiver snaps for this team, Brandon Cooks or Juwan Johnson. I would bet on Juwan Johnson there. But I will say I love that as a role for Johnson. That's when he's best, as a slot wide receiver, where he is just way too physical for slot corners. He's too fast for linebackers trying to cover him. Teams do treat him like a tight end, so it provides some of that flexibility where you can put Juwan Johnson out there with a guy like Foster Moreau, and teams don't fully know if you're going to come out and smash you with 12 personnel or if they're going to get more of a spread style formation. He brings that to the table, but he is a dominant blocker when he does get up on slot corners. So for throwing bubble screens and that kind of stuff, he's great. You can flip the ball to him where he's tough after the catch. He's got awesome hands. He runs good routes. He's a former wide receiver himself. So I like Juwan Johnson quite a bit. He gets the contract extension from this new regime. And if you want to talk about like fantasy football value in this group, he's probably the guy I would value higher than average on any of these guys. I think Juwan Johnson's going to have a really nice year. You know, last year with really bad quarterback play in the second half of the year, he ended up with 50 catches, 540 yards, 3 touchdowns. I would crank those numbers up on him. I think he gets 75 catches, close to 800 yards, 5 or 6 touchdowns. I think he finishes as something close to a top 10 fantasy football tight end. So, you know, if you're in your home leagues or if you're doing best ball drafts on Underdog, for example, and if you are, guys, code TFG, can sign up. They'll give you a bonus match and you'll support my channel in the process. But this is a really fun time to do best ball drafts. So shout out Underdog in the middle of all this. But he is my kind of fantasy football sleeper on this team. I really think he's going to fit well in this offense and surprise some people this year. But to carry on, I want to go back down the path of the wide receivers because, again, we're kind of treating Juwan Johnson as that role for the most part. But they also have Cedric Wilson, who I think will take some snaps away from Brandon Cooks as well. Cedric Wilson is a much better run after catch threat. He's not a great run blocker, but there is some familiarity there. Kellen Moore had Cedric Wilson in Dallas, where he had his best year as a slot weapon for them. So I think Cedric Wilson's going to play a good bit too. And I would also argue, again, if Olave and Shaheed are healthy, Cedric Wilson makes more sense as a skill set with those guys compared to a Brandon Cooks. And maybe I'm even talking myself into the idea that this wide receiver depth isn't all that bad. But especially after Cedric Wilson, I mean, you got Bub Means, kind of a size, speed, traits-based prospect that the Saints drafted late last year. He showed some flashes when he got on the field, but he does give you more of that size-speed combo that really none of these guys have, so he might get some opportunities really for that reason alone. And then it's going to be a complete competition probably for a 6th wide receiver here, if they even keep 6, because of how deep the tight end room is and how Juwan Johnson kind of is a piece of that wide receiver room. but some size speed type prospects in Kevin Austin and Donovan Peoples-Jones. Mason Tipton, who did get on the field for this team last year, didn't see too much to like there. And then Dante Pettis, still kicking around, fighting for roster spots too. Nice balanced player as well. But that rounds out your wide receiver depth. Then you come back to the tight end room. And, Foster Moreau is really this team's starting tight end. And he had a nice year last year. Shout out to him recovering from cancer and getting on the field, I think, sooner than a lot of people expected. Just an awesome story. And he played some of his best football last year. Made some really nice catches, did an okay job as a blocker. He's a nice, balanced, kind of mid-range, adequate starter, if you will. Long-term, you probably want a little bit more dynamism, a little bit better run blocking to be this team's kind of Dallas Goedert in this offense. But I do think Foster Moreau is good enough to play that role for now. And again, he is going to be your primary starting inline tight end, rotating on and off the field quite a bit with Juwan Johnson. And then Taysom Hill still in the mix here too. One of the more dynamic players with the ball in his hands. It's just a matter of getting him the ball in his hands that is tricky. The guy's a quarterback, right? So he's not a great route runner or anything like that. He doesn't create a ton of separation. His hands are up and down. But there are things you can do with him. You can flip the ball to him with a guy like Juwan Johnson on the wing. I'm kind of excited to see what sort of plans Kellen Moore has for Taysom Hill. And of course, he's going to get involved, I think, in the Taysom Hill package breadth of things too, which is going to play into our running back discussion momentarily. But he's hanging around here in this group. And then Dallin Holker, I really liked him coming out. He ends up going undrafted. He did get on the field late in the season for the Saints last year, showed some decent stuff. He's probably someone that ends up on the practice squad because he's another one of these kind of undersized half slot wide receiver, half tight end types. But as a developmental backup to Juwan Johnson, and if anything happened to Juwan Johnson, keep an eye on Dallin Holker. I will just say that. He's a talented player, and I like how this scheme sets up for these types of guys. So just definitely someone to keep an eye on there. You got Jack Stoll and Maliki Matevau probably competing for the last roster spot there for your true tight end. Both kind of blocking specialist types there. Matevau, rookie, and Jack Stoll has bounced around the league a good bit. And then with the running backs, Alvin Kamara will play his role. He's incredibly sure-handed. He still has great contact balance out in space. He's a great screen threat still, just with how well he kind of flows through traffic and converts into runner after the catch. He can still run routes out of the backfield, but just not quite as dynamic as he once was. Alvin Kamara in his absolute prime, one of the best receiving backs ever. That's not what he is anymore, but still a weapon you got to account for out of the backfield. And as long as he's healthy, I anticipate he's going to continue to get the vast majority of third down work here, especially because the rest of these guys haven't really proved much. Kendre Miller hasn't really come along in that department. Devin Neal projects as limited early in his career in that regard. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think actually right now, if it's week 1 and Alvin Kamara is not available, I think he might be your emergency third down back. He's still done some okay stuff catching the ball for the Chiefs, and hometown hero. It's kind of fun to see him come back, and he was here late last season as well, but just 5 targets, 3 catches, 24 yards last year for them, but he's around here. He's a guy you could probably practice squad and get away with it. I don't know how many teams are rushing to the table to pluck Clyde Edwards-Helaire off your team, or if he'd even want to leave, because it's not a bad spot for him. And then they have this kind of collection of dart throws at theoretically talented receiving backs. Velus Jones was a wide receiver. Xavier Valade and Marcus Yarns, really good college receiving threats. So all names with punters' chances to kind of emerge down the road as a potential receiving back option for this team. But that rounds out your group. Again, it's you could do worse. There are certainly worse groups of weapons out there. If you guarantee health to those top 2 guys, you actually have a good bit for Tyler Shough and Kellen Moore to work with here. and would probably rank around the top 20 in terms of weaponry, but they do get dinged for me with those health concerns. If Olave and Shaheed aren't available, you're running into basically trying to weaponize journeyman veterans pretty damn quickly here. But now we kind of transition to more of the run game here with your backfield and all the different rushing threats that they have here. And with the running back grade, the Saints still come in nicely, 18th. Like, I still think Alvin Kamara has it. I think that's a fair ranking for an Alvin Kamara-led backfield at this stage in his career. You know, he's 30 years old and he's missed some time. And I think last year he's starting to show like he might be one of these guys, kind of like Aaron Jones at this stage in his career, where he maybe slows down a little bit as the year goes on. So he's getting there, man. He maybe has 3/4 of a year to a year and a half left here, but coming out the gate like he did last year, I do think he's still got it and can still be a good starting back in the league. Still has really good contact balance, still plenty of acceleration and juice to kind of bounce runs outside and have explosive plays as well. Can still hit the hole really hard. And I think he's done a really good job too of evolving as a player, even if he's not quite as explosive as he once was and doesn't have the same contact balance that he once did. I actually think his vision has gotten better with age, which isn't terribly surprising. And as his vision has had to be a little bit better to make up for some of his lack of explosiveness, I feel like there were some runs last year where he was really pressing the hole and letting blocks set up. Not that he's ever had like bad vision, but it's never been the biggest thing that comes to my mind with Alvin Kamara. Really did impress me last year. So definitely can still play. I've got an 82 rating on him, for example. It's just how much longer are you getting that out of him, right? And that's where you start to look down the depth chart a little bit and potentially get excited about maybe this is the year that they utilize Kamara a little bit less, try to keep him healthier and fresh, and start to really give these young backs opportunities. Kendre Miller, those opportunities just haven't come since he was a third-round pick in the 2023 draft. He's dealt with some injuries, but he did get on the field last season at times and showed some really exciting flashes in terms of breaking tackles and some of the juice that made him a third-round pick. So year 3 is going to be big for him. I do think he starts with that first opportunity off the bench, but he's going to have to really show that he has developed in the sense of vision and pro capabilities at this position, because, man, Devin Neal is going to be breathing down his neck. Loved getting Devin Neal in the 6th round here. One of the steals of the draft, in my opinion. I had a 3rd-round grade on Devin Neal. Just reminds me so much of some of these lesser physically gifted backs that just are good NFL backs. Guys like David Montgomery and James Conner. So much of that in Devin Neal's game. I mean, talk about elite vision for a college back. He is like the opposite of Kendre Miller, who's, Miller's more physical talent, whereas Devin Neal is much more like he just gets the position. And I think that's going to bode well for him, man. But he's lighter on his feet than you expect. He's shiftier than you expect, but he's got good contact balance, good power, just a workhorse for the Kansas Jayhawks. So I think that was a really good pick. And, as a 6th rounder, he's going to have to really scratch and claw for those opportunities. I do think he's going to have to get ahead of Kendre Miller on the depth chart and beat out, edge out touches ahead of someone like Alvin Kamara and earn those. So I'd be pretty surprised if in the first 6 weeks of the season we see much Devin Neal. But if we get to week 17 and Alvin Kamara is kind of banged up and Kendre Miller hasn't really clicked, and Devin Neal, like in the last 6 weeks of the season, makes a statement and comes out with like multiple 100-yard games where they're putting the offense on his back, and you're heading into next year and you feel good about Devin Neal as their starting running back for 2026, I think he's got that potential to be a core player for this team. So dynasty leagues definitely targeting Devin Neal, and maybe even someone for your best ball drafts. If it's the 18th round, someone that maybe could be more of an impact player later in the season, someone to target there. And that's really all that's worth talking about with the running backs as rushing threats. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think if he's going to make it, it's going to be more of a receiving style role. It just doesn't quite have the size and power and vision to be an impact in the run game at this stage. And then everybody else, as I kind of mentioned, are more dart throws as receiving options to start with, certainly. So there's your running back room. Again, ranking 18th with a B- grade. It will get the job done this year for sure, even if it isn't the most dynamic, game-changing group with Kamara specifically at this stage in his career. But you do have to mention Taysom Hill and what he does for the QB run multiplier. He's a unique weapon. Normally, we'd just be looking at the starting quarterback for this, obviously. But if you have a theoretical designated wildcat beast like Taysom Hill, and you are Kellen Moore, who had Jalen Hurts led the NFL in designed runs for quarterbacks, I fully expect the Taysom Hill packages to still be a thing here. Absolutely. And it matters, man. There were multiple games and have been multiple games in each of the last couple seasons where Taysom Hill's a problem, man. When he gets rolling, he gets that full head of steam. There are few running backs that are as challenging to get on the ground as Taysom Hill. He reminds me of some hybrid combination as a runner of Derrick Henry and Josh Allen. And that's obviously high praise, but he's a legitimate problem. It's just, we don't quite know how much they're going to lean into that, but as a goal line threat and just kind of mixing and matching, you have to count him as a part of this variable that I do in this deep dive series, which is how much the QB run game adds to the run game as a whole. And they're absolutely going to get a factor there. As for Tyler Shook, at least to start, I don't anticipate they're going to do much read option stuff with him. I think they're going to try to get him hit as little as possible as they try to kind of, we talked about that, him potentially having times where he's afraid of contact and getting injured again. You don't want that messing with his psyche as a passer. So I don't anticipate that they will run with him too much, but maybe 2 years down the road, if he gets really comfortable, they start to do a little bit more with that because he does have legs. This is a part of his game, but I would be a little surprised if they do too much with him in year one. If Rattler were starting, you probably would want to implement that a little bit more. Not that he's great at it, but he can move a little bit. But then we round out this offense with the Hog Mollies and a unit for the New Orleans Saints that I think you should feel best about the future of this group on this team, maybe than any other position group on this team. They're not quite the highest ranking positional unit on this Saints team, but they're up there. So right now they rank 19th to 20th for offensive line overall, a little bit lower for pass blocking right now, 23rd to 26th, but they are 14th in run blocking, which is the highest individual, piece of this offense. So they rank out as a pretty solid offensive line right now, but you look forward with some young pieces on this team, and there's real hope that this can be a foundational piece of this rebuild and maybe a top 10 offensive line within the next 500 days or so. So by season's end or kind of into early next season, there's a lot to like here and a lot to get excited about. And that starts right out the gate as you go left to right with their highly invested 9th overall pick in Kelvin Banks Jr., who at this point in time, it does seem they're just going to plug him at left tackle where he played at Texas. They're going to take their promising rookie first round tackle from last year's draft, move him to right tackle where he's more comfortable. And I think, it can get overstated at times where you want the better pass protector to be your blindside guy on the left, and then the right tackle is traditionally more of the run blocking oriented, take him or leave him as a pass blocker type. That's a little bit of an outdated philosophy, but there is still something to be said about you should want your best pass protector as your left tackle, because protecting the blind side does still matter. The quarterback can see the right tackle lose and do something about it, whereas you might not see the left tackle lose and be able to do something about it. So not just from that perspective, but I do think Fuanga is more comfortable and plays better as a right tackle, and I think Kelvin Banks will be at his best as a left tackle. So I really like this move for the Saints. It makes a ton of sense. There's been some questions on if Banks might play some guard and they'll play Trevor Penning as a tackle. Really doesn't seem like that's what they want to do right now. They want to get this thing going. They know these are their cornerstone tackle duos. Lock them in, let them develop at these spots, and then try to secure the rest of the offensive line around those guys. I think it's a really smart strategy for the Saints. So I love what they're doing there. In the case of Kelvin Banks, really not a ton to say, man. Like, he was the 11th player in the draft for me. They take him 9th. I think he's a better pass protector than a run blocker right now, just because the dude's just a machine in terms of technique. I loved his footwork. I loved his hand usage. Hardly ever lost at Texas. Just so much to like in that phase. I don't think he's an elite athlete. I think he's a more rangy tackle in terms of kick slides and cutting off inside moves than someone like Fuanga is. But I don't think he's maybe has elite upside in terms of athletic ability. But it's certainly good enough. And as a run blocker, like, he's not bad. He has play strength. He's got good hands. Again, an okay athlete, but doesn't quite have that mean streak on tape all the time that certainly someone like Fuanga might have, but even some other guys in the draft. Like, he's as a prospect, a solid run blocker and a very good pass blocker. And I anticipate him coming in with franchise left tackle potential. You can't rank him too high out the gate because that's not how this process works. But the pick was totally reasonable and a lot of optimism for what he can be over the next 2-3 years into his prime. But then you go to left guard, and this is going to be interesting. Right now, I think Dylan Radins is the favorite to be the left guard. He started at guard for the Titans last year, and it wasn't great, but I would say has been an adequate guard for the last couple of years. They give him a 1-year, $2 million deal, though, so it's not anything guaranteed for him. Again, I think out the gate, he's going to be in there with the ones, but I do anticipate that they try Trevor Penning as a guard and see how that goes. He certainly has more potential, former first-round pick. Not that Radins doesn't have potential, though, by the way. Radins is a good athlete, was a second-round pick, and has gotten kind of incrementally better every year, just as Trevor Penning has in his young career. But Penning, like, when he does connect as a run blocker, like, he is an insane athlete with really good play strength. So I think they would love it if he could, as a former first-round pick, settle in as a guard. And a core reason I believe they will do this is, number one, this is the original organization that actually had a 6'7" guard. It's become more and more of a trend in recent years, but for a long time, Andrews Pete was like the only guard in the league listed at 6'7", and the Saints have done that before. That's where Trevor Penning is at. Traditionally speaking, NFL staffs view that as being too tall to gain leverage against the shorter interior defensive linemen that you face at that position. And there's reason to believe that, but there's also a lot of tape with guys like Mekhi Becton and a little bit of what we saw from Daniel Falele, among some other guys last year that did it at 6'7", 6'8", sliding inside and being okay at guard. There's increased reason to believe that these guys can hold up just fine at guard. But also, Mekhi Becton was with Kellen Moore with the Eagles last year. Kellen Moore literally did this last year, took a behemoth tackle and put him at guard, and it worked for them. So, Penning's going to have every opportunity to win that job. And I like this. I think you have a pretty good chance between Radins and Penning. That's a very reasonable, sound competition to have. And may the best man win. And you're hoping that whoever comes through that competition and looks the best is going to be your weakest link. And if the winner of that competition is your weakest link, with the loser of that competition being someone that can play as both a swing tackle and a swing guard, that's not bad at all, man. I mean, we got to see what these players can be for this Saints team, but you could do worse than those two guys competing at guard. I don't want to oversell it. Radens has play strength concerns, and Trevor Penning has struggled to gain leverage with his height as a tackle. So it's far from a guarantee that he can find success as a guard. So I don't want to oversell it. There's a better than not chance that we get to 2026 and this team is looking for a starting guard. But there is a chance that one of these guys can have a nice year and settle in. But that's really your main question, right? Like Eric McCoy is your next biggest question, but that's purely health related. If you can guarantee me health for Eric McCoy, he is by far this team's best offensive lineman on paper. And frankly, man, if Eric McCoy could just stay healthy, he's in the conversation for who the best center in the NFL is. I mean, it's pretty clearly Creed Humphrey right now because Creed Humphrey is available all the time. Frank Ragnow's right behind him. Look, Eric McCoy is not far from what those guys are as centers in the league when he's healthy. And when you are getting banged up all the time, it's hard to stack good performances on top of each other, establish that continuity with the guys next to you, and really prove yourself to be that elite center. But there's so much to like with Eric McCoy, especially as a run blocker, great athlete, great play strength. Just like some of the other top centers in the league, guys like maybe Ragnow, Tyler Linderbaum. If he gets isolated one-on-one as a pass blocker, he might have some losses in there, but generally speaking, a very good pass protector as well. So in 2023, Eric McCoy was able to be out there all year, but 2024, 2021, 2022, he's missed a lot of time. So that's a concern, is how much he's going to be available for them. But hopefully he can stay healthy. He's only 27 years old right now. There's a lot of theoretical good football still ahead for Eric McCoy. And playing just 293 snaps this last season was by far the least he's ever played. You hope you can at least get, 2021, 2022. He still at least played, 13, 14, 15 games, that type of stuff. So there's your center. And then at right guard, Cesar Ruiz. Cesar Ruiz makes me laugh because his career has literally just been like Madden development, where it's entirely linear and like he's just getting incrementally better every single year. That is not the case for 95% of NFL players, I would say, is you don't get that like clean year-to-year growth. That's where Cesar Ruiz is at. He came into the league as a first-round pick, really struggled early, but settled in as like an okay player, got a contract extension, I think, before last year, had his best year last year. He's a nice overall player, man. He's got the athleticism, he's got play strength, his blocker awareness has gotten better every single year. He's a balanced player. He can hang in as a pass blocker. He can absolutely block any sort of run scheme. So him as like your third or fourth best offensive lineman is a very nice piece. And at this point, with how the guard market has spiked, he's almost become a value for the Saints at like $12 million or whatever it is. There are worse guards getting bigger contracts in free agency at this point. So it's come full circle on Cesar Ruiz, where at a time I questioned if he should be an answer for the Saints, but right now it's like if McCoy can stay healthy, you find an answer at guard and the tackles develop, like I can be just fine with Cesar Ruiz as one of my starters. And then you got Fuanga at right tackle, where it feels like now that he's at right tackle, you don't have to kind of compare his pass blocking to all of the great pass protecting left tackles in the league, and you're now comparing him to the pass protecting right tackles in the league. It's just a different measure. And with Fuanga as a right tackle, I mean, he could absolutely develop into a top 10 right tackle as early as this year, but certainly within the next couple of years. I mean, as a run blocker, the dude is nasty. Textbook combination of play strength and dickhead mentality. When he meets linebackers at the second level, it's over. Like I don't know. Nobody tracks pancake blocks, but I would bet Fuanga was in a good category of linemen in terms of pancake blocks last year for sure. But yeah, as a pass protector, slower feet, not a ton of range, moves a little bit more like a guard, if you will. So he will collect his losses and did collect his losses in his rookie season in pass protection, but it wasn't that he was a liability. he does have good hands and overall good technique. So if he can continue to kind of clean stuff up and be a solid pass protector and an elite run blocker, that as a right tackle is a massive thumbs up. So it's a very positive conversation with really those 6 names on the offensive line, of course, with your competition at guard. And then again, I'll reiterate the point, whoever loses that guard spot, I think settles in as a really nice sort of 6 man of the year piece for this O-line, where you can put either Radins or Penning as a backup tackle or a guard on either side of the formation and probably survive for a week or two with those guys stepping in. So I like the depth in that sense. I'd be worried about your backup center. Will Clapp, really, like, I don't understand why they wouldn't go back to Connor McGovern, who they signed last year. Like, maybe he doesn't want to play anymore or something. But if you are a team that has one of the more injury-prone centers in the league, I maybe would have wanted to spend a little bit more on a backup there, or maybe go try to make a play for like a Josh Myers or Bradley Bozeman or something like that you just feel a little bit better if Eric McCoy is going to miss a quarter of the season, which feels likely. Will Clapp just isn't a great answer. He's not. So I don't love that. And then you're kind of just getting into developmental prospect territory with guys like Ball, Ezram, Saldivari, Hergel, and your undrafted rookie additions there. But you're at least 1 deep at guard and tackle, which is more than some teams can say. And then it falls off pretty quick, just like most teams with O-line depth. Just a quick note on your run blocking skill players. Ended up having them with 16 other teams that get a 0% boost to the run blocking grade from their skill players. Not that these guys stink, but no notable additions. Foster Moreau as your key blocking tight end there is just an adequate average tight end. And then your outside wide receivers, not very good run blockers, but you do get a bump from Juwan Johnson playing slot wide receiver there, where he's really good blocking as a slot wide receiver, but really not much to write home about from your skill player blockers. But that does conclude the offensive breakdown for the New Orleans Saints. And their final grade for their offense does not come in dead last. They are 29th for me on offense, primarily because I think their run game is going to be capable. They come in 20th overall for run game, 31st in passing game. However, with Tyler Shough obviously being the key factor there, 32nd ranked quarterback, it's tough to rank too high for your passing game. But we're talking about a 32nd ranked team here for a reason. But there's pieces to like with this offense, I think, in particular, the offensive line, and hoping that these wide receivers can stay healthy and establish themselves as, the building blocks of your playmakers for years to come. And then you got some fun rookies to keep an eye on too, with guys like Devin Neal. And of course, what does Tyler Shough look like? That's kind of your biggest thing you got to find out this year for this Saints team. But let's transition now to the defense. We obviously trashed Brandon Staley earlier, but let's talk about the talent he has to work with. Starting with the defensive line, which it's very much the same looking group from last year with some minor additions here, which leaves them as a very just adequate group, kind of C grades across the board. They rank 30th for overall defensive line, 26th to 30th in both pass rush and D-line run defense, with C grades again across the board. This is a balanced unit. They have a variety of bodies, but really no difference makers in a league where the majority of defensive lines in the league have at least one difference-making player. You don't really have that with the Saints. So let's start with their edge group, then we'll go inside. But they did bring Chase Young back to a 3-year, $51 million contract. He's their most expensive player and their best overall pass rusher. He obviously hasn't lived up to his hype. He's had a lot of injuries throughout his career, but Chase Young has established himself as a very solid number 2 level pass rusher in the NFL. He's got a good bull rush. He's got good speed across the outside shoulder of the tackle, a couple inside counters. He can beat you. Not going to take over a game if you had one or even two really nice pieces around Chase Young, you'd feel really good about where he's at. But as your best pass rusher, that's just going to leave you towards the bottom of the league in terms of ranking these pass rushes when it's kind of an arms race with these teams really going for it at this critical position group. So that obviously they've got a lot of work still to do in terms of beefing this group up. But you do have Carl Granderson opposite of him, who's also a really nice kind of number 2B type of piece. I would say both Chase Young and Carl Granderson are nice 2B types of pieces. They're very close in terms of how I would rank these guys. I do think Chase Young's a little bit more consistent, a little more methodical as a rusher, whereas Carl Granderson probably a little bit more matchup dependent, where he's either got to kind of overwhelm you with his bull rush or he can beat you with a nice inside swim move counter. Granderson's also really nice as a penetrator on loops and stunts, but that was also much more of a staple of Dennis Allen's system, whereas Brandon Staley, not nearly as creative at doing ET and TE stunts. But again, nice player. If you want to talk about run defense for these two guys, Granderson, for what it's worth, is one of the better run defending edge rushers in the league. He kind of saved this defensive line from being a C- grade for their D-line run defense. But he's awesome. And, coming in with that sort of undrafted mentality, but a physically talented guy, he fell for off-field reasons and has proved that to have been a mistake by the league. But he's got length and strength and size, and he brings that undrafted mentality to the table as a run defender, whereas Chase Young's kind of the opposite, where he is, blue chip, first round mentality. He can defend the run when he wants to, but he doesn't quite have that consistency as a run defender as someone like Carl Granderson. But together they make for a nice edge rush run defense duo. And then you have Cam Jordan, who's going to circle in off the bench, who I'm interested to see how Brandon Staley wants to use him. And just in general, we've gotten so used to Dennis Allen's scheme being this 4-man front. It's going to be very different with Brandon Staley, much more of a traditional kind of 2-4 base nickel front. And then sometimes you're going to get like 5-1 fronts. And that's where I'm kind of curious with Cam Jordan. Like, how do they want to use him? I think in the rare situations where Brandon Staley is willing to get into a base 3-4 front, Cam Jordan as a base end there would make a lot of sense, kind of as their Morgan Fox, if you will. I do think in a base 2-4 defense, he's probably a stand-up edge outside linebacker. But if they're talking about doing those kind of 5-1 penny fronts, he's, again, probably more of a defensive end at his size. So that's not something we've seen a ton of Cam Jordan. He really has just been a kind of classic 4-3 defensive end type. So a very different scheme fit at his age. How well does he take that on? He's a complete crapshoot in terms of how well he plays in Brandon Staley's defense. And I could see it going, in a couple different directions there, man. I really could see him playing okay, because I do think his best pass rushing reps came as kind of a 4-eye for the Saints last year. There weren't a ton of good pass rushing reps with him at his age, but he can still do a little bit against guards. And he's been a physical run defender throughout his career, but that's been more defending the edge, not necessarily taking on double teams as an interior guy. I'm not going to say he could do it, but it's tough. Like, that's a lot to ask out of a 290-pound, 35-year-old vet to do that. So we'll kind of see what he can do for this team this year. He'll be interesting. But then you really do have a couple of traditional edge pieces. Isaiah Foskey, who's been a complete bust of a pick. What a reach that was. Hated that pick when they made it, and he's hardly gotten on the field. Like, anything you get from Isaiah Foskey is house money. He gives you essentially nothing in terms of edge depth right now. Honestly, I like Fadil Diggs better, and it's kind of ironic. I think I had a 4th round grade. Maybe it was a 3rd to a 4th round grade on Isaiah Foskey coming out. I had a 4th round grade on Fadil Diggs. So Foskey goes in the 2nd round. Fadil Diggs goes in the 7th round. Different players for sure. Foskey, much more of a run defending prospect. Fadil Diggs was a pretty savvy pass rushing prospect in a really deep edge rush class. He's got some bend. They used him kind of lined up as an inside pass rusher, like as a mugged up A-gap linebacker rusher. Brandon Staley, for what it's worth, did do some of that with Tuli Tuipulotu. So maybe a little bit of Fadil Diggs getting in there as a situational pass rusher could be something to keep an eye on. But I like that pick, and I think there's a pretty good chance that Fadil Diggs is their best true pass rushing edge rusher off the bench, because I don't think that's Cam Jordan, at least as an edge player, and I don't think it's Isaiah Foskey. So we'll keep an eye on Fadil Diggs, a nice pick. And then you got Jonah Williams, who's back into that sort of defensive end mold as a base end for this team. And then Chris Rumpf was in LA with Staley. I don't know that he'll make the team or not. He's very undersized and hasn't accomplished too much, unfortunately, at this stage. So their edge depth is pretty tough. You got a couple of solid starters there in Young and Granderson, but obviously a group that they're going to need to continue to try to get a little bit more juice there or find a home run on the inside. Like if you could drop a Quinnen Williams or a Jeffrey Simmons or like a legit alpha interior rusher and have Chase Young and Carl Granderson as your 2B pieces, that I could get behind as well. But obviously right now that's not what they have. They're still hopeful that Bryan Bresee can develop. I don't think he can reach quite that level here in year 3, but he has gotten incrementally better as a pass rusher. Still a young player, was coming out of Clemson, just 21 years old. Really, it's been all in flashes with Bryan Bresee. He's had some impressive games. He started to show that he's got a bull rush in there. You know, year 1, it felt like it was pretty much all just the spin move. But yeah, I mean, he started to rush with a little bit more power this year, and we saw his production go up a little bit. He did end up with 38 pressures, 8 PFF sacks. I don't know how many real sacks he had because PFF counts half sacks as full sacks. But yeah, I mean, he did a good enough job getting after the quarterback last year, and there's reason to believe he can continue to get better there. The problem with Bryan Bresee, I think he's the worst starting defensive tackle in terms of run defense. 2 years now and going back to Clemson, he just doesn't get it, man. Like, he plays with high pad level. He has no play strength. He can get off blocks, but for the majority of times, it just doesn't matter. Like, the amount of space that he gets driven off the ball, it's wild. It is wild. And that's where it's like, man, it's tough for him to project as ever being a star player or a 3-down player when he's that big of a liability, especially now in a Brandon Staley defense. You know, Dennis Allen does a pretty good job of slanting guys and sheltering guys and moving different bodies around. Brandon Staley's a lot less creative in that sense, where he's just going to stick Bryan Bresee as a 3-tech and say, go take on double teams. It could be a nightmare. So I'm really worried about that. But if he can take another step as a pass rusher, he can be good enough in that phase where you want him as a part of your starting rotation. And I think he can do that, but I'm not going to say you're swimming in excitement for Bryan Bresee. You're just kind of cautiously optimistic that he can be a nice piece, if that makes sense. But someone you, I think, are always at this point going to have to protect in run defense unless he really surprises there. And that is where you're going to see a pretty major rotation around Bryan Bresee and including Bryan Bresee. You know, I do think Brandon Staley will protect Bryan Bresee by making him play the run as little as possible. But when he is asked to play the run, I don't think they're going to do too much schematically to protect him. But he's going to rotate with all these veterans, right? You have Devon Godshaw gets brought in, and maybe it's incorrect to kind of put him up there as the quote-unquote starter. I don't know that there's going to be a defined starter necessarily between Godshaw, Shepard, and Sanders. What I do believe is that Godshaw is most well equipped to play the nose tackle out of those 3 guys, and therefore will probably be the leading snap getter, knowing that they want to keep Brzee out there to kind of develop as a 3 technique a lot. So that's why I put him up there, but you will see a lot of Shepard and Colin Sanders as well. But Godshaw's a one-trick pony. They traded for him for a reason, to be a 1-year stopgap nose tackle in their system, and he's okay at it. He's not the biggest player for a nose tackle, so if you ask him to take on double teams, he will go backwards. But he does do a good job sinking his hips, dropping the dead leg. He's done a lot of dirty work for the Patriots over the years. Not the best playmaker, doesn't get off blocks all that well or penetrate or anything like that, but he understands his job and he's willing to do it. It was a nice acquisition to bring him in as a part of this rotation. And then I think Colin Sanders would probably be the other top nose tackle player. Again, they're going to spend a lot of time in a base 4-2 front or base 2-4 front with your edge rushers, being on the line, obviously. But with 2 interior D linemen and 2 linebackers behind them, Brandon Staley is typically going to have a 3 technique and a nose tackle there. So Colin Sanders will probably be the other primary nose tackle, being the guy with size and a guy that can kind of get his pads down and do an okay enough job taking on double teams. He's not great at it, but Colin Sanders is a really nice backup 3rd or 4th defensive tackle to have. They do have depth in that sense. And then again, for that 3 tech spot, it's going to be a lot of Brian Brzee. It's going to be a lot of Nathan Shepard, maybe a little bit of Cam Jordan at times. But I do like Nathan Shepard as a pass rusher. He actually stood out to me on tape. He's got a nice bull rush. He's got some quick hitting athletic pass rushing moves. So he's going to be a nice part of this rotation. It could just be as simple as far as their nickel defenses are concerned, they'll go a drive with Brzee and Godshaw, and then the next drive, it's going to be Sanders and Shepard. And it's just going to be a true drive-to-drive rotation in that sense, kind of taking your hockey line approach with your interior D linemen. It could really be that simple because it does kind of line up that way. And then you'll kind of have your sort of spin-off, like they will run 5-1 penny fronts, for example, where it'll be either Godshaw or Colin Sanders as the nose tackle. And then you have all these different 3 techniques, whether it's Brzee, Nathan Shepard, Cam Jordan, Vernon Broughton, who I want to talk about. That can be your kind of rotation of sort of base ends, if you will. Chase Young and Carl Granderson are going to have to play a lot, in my opinion, just because the edge depth is not where the interior D-line depth is at. And I know we're kind of talking all over the place here, but I do want to talk about Vernon Broughton. They spent a 3rd round pick on him. Ironically, my pro comp on him was Nathan Shepard. At least my low end pro comp was Nathan Shepard, which if you're a 3rd round pick and you turn into a Nathan Shepard who's playing here on a $6 million a year contract, that's a successful pick for a 3rd rounder. I think Broughton has even higher upside though. But I was really impressed by Broughton on that Texas defensive line. I kind of went against consensus when he made my top 10 interior defensive lineman list when I put that out in March. So I'm definitely a big fan of him. He's got a good bull rush. He's got a really good club swim move. He wins in a variety of ways, and he was definitely the better pass rushing defensive tackle on that Texas defensive line than Alfred Collins. Now, Collins was a much better run defender. Broughton's got to learn to keep his pads down and prove that he can defend the run at the NFL level. But I like this as a spot where he can kind of pick his spots. They'll make him a part of those rotations. Maybe gets 10, 12 snaps a game, and then really can learn from a like-bodied player in Nathan Shepard, and has potential to emerge as a starter down the road for them. So I like Vernon Broughton. I just don't know how much we see him in year 1 with how deep the 4 guys, even 4.5, including Cam Jordan ahead of him. There's just only so many opportunities to go around here in this group. And then Christian Boyd as well, I would hope makes this team. Again, Christian Boyd can play that nose tackle spot. He is the biggest defensive tackle in this group. And if he really takes a step forward, he was hit or miss in his rookie season, but if he really gets to work, he could actually play a really nice role and emerge as this team's kind of true starting nose tackle down the road. Sanders and Godshaw are kind of 1-year stopgap options for them. Boyd could emerge as more of a long-term solution there. So you have some, I do really like where they're at relative to expectations. you've got some young guys with promise, being Brzee, Broughton, Boyd, but you're not going to suck either. You're going to have a nice rotation. You're going to have good mentors in the building. And it's a nice floor, at least in terms of run defense, at least when Brian Brezee's not on the field, which that drags it down, right? Again, he just might be the worst starting run defending defensive tackle in the league. But I think that's a good wrap up on this defensive line. Again, this is not the finished product, but they do have a lot of veteran bodies to work with here, and it should at least allow them to do what they want to do schematically and shouldn't entirely hold this defense back. It's just not a group that is, I think, going to project this defense forward into anything special at this point in time. Unlike the linebackers, as we get to this group, this is undoubtedly the best position group on the New Orleans Saints right now. They rank as the second best linebacker room in the league for me, ranking tied with one other team for first in run defense and 4th to 8th in linebacker coverage. A couple of familiar faces here with Demario Davis and Pete Werner. Can damn well make the case that this is the best linebacker duo in the league today, at least for now, because I wouldn't be stunned if Demario Davis draws some phone calls. Davis, at 36 years old and heading into the last year of his contract, is a pretty obvious trade candidate for this Saints team. You know, if you're losing games and you're at the trade deadline, like, wouldn't a contender be willing to go and get Demario Davis, who is still one of the best linebackers in the league, just for a year? Is there not a team that would give you a late 3rd or an early 4th round pick to get this guy? It's a high price for a 1-year rental, but I don't think it's crazy. There's just not a lot of guys that can do what Demario Davis does, and that makes selling him and trading him off hard for the Saints. But man, he's going to be 37 years old next year, and we know where this team is at. So for now, this is where this linebacker room ranks. Don't know if they're going to make it through the year with both these guys. But ultimately, you can't really say enough about Demario Davis. A true ageless wonder. To do what he does at 36 years old, to really hardly regress at all, man. Like, yeah, he's slowing down ever so slightly, but you don't really notice it. He can still cover. You still see him pick up running backs out of the backfield and get depth in his zone drops. Had another 5 passes defended last year, which doesn't sound like a ton, but that is well above average for starting linebackers in the league. It's just so hard for these guys to make an impact in the passing game, and he does that. And just an awesome run defender, right? Like, he's 248 pounds at 6'2". He's nasty. He's got the play strength. And obviously, at his age, he has elite run defense diagnostics. So as long as he's out there for this Saints team, they are in a really good spot in terms of the middle of their defense, especially when you have Pete Werner next to him, who gets the contract extension here. Really nice, just good starting linebacker. Has never really emerged as a superstar or anything like that. Has never really taken that big step as a coverage defender where he's just okay. He's got okay feel in zone. He's an okay athlete manning guys up. Not a liability, but not an impact player in coverage. But he is a really good run defender. Has the size, has the diagnostics, willing to take on blocks. You want to see him become a more consistent tackler. That's probably something that's held him back from kind of taking that next step in terms of how we view Pete Werner. And he's got to show that he can kind of get through a season healthy. He's missed so much time over his, throughout the course of his career. But either way, like, a really good player. They extended him at about $8 million a year, and he's just kind of a textbook number 2 linebacker. And you put that next to Demario Davis, who's still to this day at worst top 5 linebackers in the league. All those top 5 guys right now don't really have good running mates next to him like Davis has with Pete Werner, right? Fred Warner lost Ray Greenlaw. Roquan Smith lost Patrick Queen. There's just not a ton of competition for who the best linebacker duo in the league is today, and I think the Saints just might take the cake. So at least as your number 32 team, you can brag about that for now, Saints fans, but I think Demario Davis just might be the most likely trade candidate in the entire National Football League, outside of maybe one other player left in the secondary still to talk about. But another reason you might trade Demario Davis is they did spend a 4th-round pick on the talented Danny Stutzman. I think he has the potential to be a long-term starter for the Saints. He's a great athlete. He impressed me with his zone IQ for a young linebacker. Really aggressive run defender who missed his fair share of tackles and, either over pursues the ball, under pursues his ball, has got to take better angles to the ball. A lot to learn, but made a lot of splash plays in run defense too. A really fun, fast, physical player. Love the idea of him getting whatever time he can to learn from a guy like Demario Davis, and definitely can see a picture where you get to week 8 of the season. Stutzman's learned a lot in that stage. You're ready to see what you have in him, get him those live reps, and let Demario go, maybe sail off into the sunset on a championship caliber team. But beyond that, you have really, decent depth in my opinion, but nobody that I'm really pegging as like potential starters. You got DeMarco Jackson, who's been a nice special teamer, a heavy hitting type that's been around this team for a few years. Nephi Sewell got on the field last year, did some good stuff. Maybe he surprises, but I think as depth, he's a nice piece. And then Jalen Ford was drafted by this team last year as well. 5th-round pick. He didn't end up getting on the field. He was a nice balanced player. Probably lacks the athletic traits to be more of a starter, but again, he hasn't played yet, so I expect that he makes this team and kind of gets in the mix there. And then some undrafted types behind Ford there. So it's a lot of red. It's a lot of unproven talent as backups, but that is the nature of linebackers in the NFL. I would actually consider this a relatively deep group of linebackers by modern NFL standards. So this is your resounding home for optimism on the New Orleans Saints, is this linebacking group that will absolutely get the job done as long as Pete Werner's on the field and Demario Davis is on this team. But then we get to the secondary, and we're kind of back to a group that is a work in progress, to say the least. There is some stuff to like here, but a lot of questions at the same time. So the Saints rank 22nd to 26th with a C+ grade in DB coverage for me. Kind of par for the course with this team. Let's start at the cornerback room. So they have Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's their number 1 corner right now. I like Kool-Aid. I think he's a nice player, very physical dude, not the fastest player, not even the biggest player, but a good man-to-man corner who now is going to have to prove what he can do in a very zone-heavy system in Brandon Staley's defense. So that'll be different for him. I think he's best in press man coverage, kind of getting a guy's hip pocket. So I think he's a smart player and in time can prove to be a good player in this system. It just might be a bit of an adjustment for him, but he did do a lot of this quarter stuff at Alabama too. So it's not necessarily something I'm worried about. I do think long-term, Kool-Aid fell to the 2nd round for a reason. He lacks the typical traits of a number 1 corner in the league. Sometimes guys can transcend those traits and prove you wrong, but realistically, a high 4 player coming into the league, had a really good rookie season. I still think there's room to grow, especially in more of a zone-heavy system, to prove that he can potentially be like a elite zone IQ type of guy. Think of like maybe Rasul Douglas comes to mind. You think back to like maybe Josh Norman, for example. There are outliers there, and I really do think Kool-Aid is a smart, good football player. So we'll see just how high his heights can go. But I did like what we saw from him as a rookie, and as one of your starting corners, I'm totally fine with him. It's just, again, you're probably down the road looking for more of a physically gifted player to be your number 1 corner in time. And I just don't think that guy's on the roster right now. Because on the opposite side of him, you've got Isaac Yiadom coming back, was here in 2023, had the best year of his career, was a major outlier on his career where he's otherwise really struggled. So, good to see him back. But again, just totally different system than what he was doing with Dennis Allen. So it's just really hard to expect too much from Yiadom, who did struggle a lot more in more of a quarters heavy system with Brandon Staley with the Niners last year, but I don't think he sucks. He's a true Band-Aid veteran option. I will say there has been some talk about this team signing Asante Samuel Jr. I don't hate that because it's not like there's any young players that you'd really be blocking their opportunity by doing that. And Asante Samuel is, somewhat similar to like when they brought in Chase Young, a younger player with talent that maybe if he plays well can actually be a part of the future. I would like that for the Saints, and it would maybe even tick up their coverage grade to more of like a B-, where it's at a C+ right now. Wouldn't change them from being the number 32 team in the rankings or anything like that, but just worth noting that, Samuel does fit Brandon Staley's system. He's familiar with him. We'll see if they can get that job done. But for now, it's looking like Yadam as your Band-Aid option. He's going to be one of the lower ranking CB2s in the league for sure. And then in the slot, you have Alontae Taylor there. He has been a complete roller coaster as a second-round pick for this team. He's heading into the fourth year of that rookie deal. Now, I'll be honest, when Alontae Taylor was playing slot corner in the games that I was watching earlier in the season, I did kind of like what I saw, especially from a run defense perspective. To be fair, overly aggressive, still misses a lot of tackles, but I was really impressed by his play strength and his tenacity to take on blocks and to contribute in the run game. That is something that can prove to be very valuable in a Brandon Staley defense from the slot because they play in so many lighter fronts. Having a legitimate impact run defender in that slot can actually make a major difference on your defense. So I'm intrigued. The coverage from him has been all over the map. I do think he made some good plays from the slot in coverage last year. He's incredibly athletic, and sometimes he does anticipate stuff really well and make some good plays on the ball. So he's a risk taker. He's a week-to-week coverage player for sure, but he is someone that I'm definitely interested to see what year 4 in a different defense has to offer for him. And if he had a nice year and became someone they extended and one of the core players of the 2027 Saints, which is kind of the point of this year's Saints team, is to find your core players. Alontae Taylor is someone with the hope to be that, right? So we'll see what he can do. And then right now, currently with no Asante Samuel Jr., the depth is just brutal. I mean, you have Quincy Riley, who they spent a 4th-round pick on. I like Quincy Riley. I think he's a frisky player, undersized. I wanted to see him land in an off-zone style system because he's a very heady player when he anticipates things. He's got good ball skills, and I like him in an off-zone system because he gets to play in space as opposed to having to play press man coverage. Like if this was Dennis Allen's defense, they never would have taken Quincy Riley. But for a Brandon Staley defense, I would just say like shades of like a Darius Williams. I'm not saying he's going to be Darius Williams, but the same idea with these undersized, skinnier corners, kind of like an Asante Samuel Jr., where you use their quickness and their anticipation and their ball skills almost as an extension of your safety group, and they can make an impact on your defense. So I see why they like him. Wouldn't be the biggest surprise if they eventually just go with Riley over Isaac Yiadom, assuming Asante Samuel isn't brought in here, just to kind of see what he can do, because for sure Isaac Yiadom's just a veteran Band-Aid. So maybe at some point you turn to the rookie and see what he can do there. But certainly not expecting him to be a day 1 starter for them. And then you got Ugo Amadi, who is really just slot corner depth for this team, and that's about it. And then I don't really have anything else to say about the rest of these corners. It's just all undrafted, unproven talent. It is a remarkably thin cornerback room, which again is a big reason this team should consider signing someone like Samuel Jr. Now, the safety depth is pretty damn good. Some of the best in the league, frankly. And the starting duo is pretty damn good. Similar to the linebacker group, though, I will say, for now, you have a 33-year-old Tyrann Mathieu on the last year of his deal, a blatantly obvious trade candidate for this Saints team. There's even been some talks about whether or not they might consider moving him. But as long as it's him and Justin Reed back there, that is a very, very good safety duo. I would just say probably top 10 in terms of safety duos in the league. And both like eerily familiar players. Two guys that have slot corner backgrounds. Justin Reed was a slot corner coming out of Stanford. A couple of guys that obviously Matthew started in Arizona, but both ended up in Houston, then Kansas City, then New Orleans. They've followed that same trajectory. But I mean, love these guys in a Brandon Staley defense. I do. I'm actually excited to see these guys play together in a quarters heavy system. I think when you have that slot corner background, you're really comfortable running quarters where really eventually you got to kind of trigger and turn and run and match up with guys similar to how you would from a slot corner position. And both those guys have those traits as rangy safeties on the back end as well. Both these guys can rotate single high. Both these guys are really nice buzzing down. They can both man up tight ends and do really whatever it is you want. Like in these Fangio style systems, they call them split safety defenses for a reason. You don't have that typical free safety, strong safety relationship. You need two safeties that can do a little bit of everything. And that is absolutely the case with both these guys. And you really can just kind of talk about these two collectively. I would rank Tyrann Mathieu ahead of Justin Reed as an overall player, but the idea is exactly the same. So I love that as a duo, as long as those two guys are out there. And then your depth, Jordan Howden can play and has played for this Saints team. He's a sound tackler. He's a sound coverage defender, but not a playmaking coverage defender. I think he's probably peaked out as just a really nice backup, a good special teamer, someone that can play in a pinch and your defense isn't going to self-combust. But even going back to college, just a guy that hasn't really emerged as a difference-making safety is the way I would put it. Even if he has the athletic traits and the size and the tackling consistency, there's just a little bit something missing with him. But nice depth to have one way or another. And then they spend the third-round pick on Jonas Sanker. Sanker, to me, was a really traitsy player coming out of Virginia and someone with the developmental upside to turn into more of a difference-making guy. Now, I'm very critical of this Saints team for taking Sanker over Xavier Watts. To me, that's overthinking the gamble on athletic traits, whereas Xavier Watts is just the much better player, and you let him go a couple picks later to the Falcons, and that'll be an interesting take to track. Sanker's tape to me just left a lot to be desired. I thought he was slow to trigger against the run. He wasn't a bad tackler, but missed a few too many tackles for my liking. I didn't love his anticipation from quarters where you really do want to see those dig routes and posts developing underneath you and be able to trigger and close that space. I don't care if you're slightly faster than a guy like Xavier Watts. If you're not seeing it and you're not actually actively covering stuff, it don't matter. So I don't hate Sanker as a prospect. I had him as more of a fourth, fifth round guy. They take him in the third ahead of better players, in my opinion. But he did have some of the highest potential because he is a really nice athlete. So you're counting on them to coach him up. Well, Brandon Staley didn't exactly accomplish that when they spent a third round pick on the talented JT Woods in 2022 for the LA Chargers. So I don't know if I'm betting on Brandon Staley to get the most out of Jonas Sanker. But that's where I'm at with him. Still worth keeping an eye on. If they were to move Tyrann Mathieu, I would think they want to give a guy like Sanker, who they just drafted, those reps, and then we'll see how well he can develop. Not that he's a certified bust or that I hate him or anything like that. It's just I do think he's got a ways to go. JT Gray, special teamer. Terrell Burgess, definitely a guy that has kind of lived off of his draft pedigree for a little bit too long. I think was a third round pick by the Rams like 3 or 4 years ago. So I doubt he makes the team along with Elliot Davison there, who I'm unfamiliar with. But yeah, there is your secondary. Again, a C+ grade, ranking 22nd to 26th. Probably not a ton of potential for this group to transcend that for now. They weren't going to be able to get a bunch of young talent into every single unit on this team. Granted, if they took Xavier Watts, I'd probably be a little bit more excited about their potential. But if they sign Asante Samuel, probably would rank with more of a B- grade and 19th or something like that. But then they could just turn around and trade Tyrann Mathieu and they're back to where they started. So that rounds out your Saints defense. Now, this unit did come out ranking 32nd. And I know Saints fans are going to see that and say, there's no way. We've been too good of a defense over the last 4 years to be the worst defense in the league this year. We have enough solid pieces on this team to not be the worst defense in the league. And to be fair, I agree. I don't think this is the worst defensive roster in the league. But I'm that low on Brandon Staley. I think you put this defense in the hands of a Brandon Staley, and you very, very well could end up with the worst defense in the league. So that's where I'm at with this group. I think they're going to get ran all over, especially. I have them ranked 32nd in the league for run defense. I think some of these veterans, guys like Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, 7 weeks into this season are going to be like, what the hell are we doing? Like, this is stupid. Like, we have no chance out here against the run with this scheme. And that's been the moral of the story on Brandon Staley for a long time. So that really drags them down. They are 30th in pass defense, which, again, a coach I still don't really trust there, but an okay pass rush, okay secondary. It cranks them up a little bit there to the 30th group. But maybe surprisingly low ranking for this Saints defense, but with how I feel about Brandon Staley, maybe not all that surprising at the end of the day. But then for your special teams summary here, I don't spend too much time on the special teams just because it is very, very hard to project. But I do have kind of a formula here that spits out special teams grades. I did add the returner grade this year, which I'm hoping can get us even closer to predicting how these teams' special teams are going to turn out. But yeah, we look at the team's previous season's team grades per PFF and DVOA, and the Saints were pretty split from those sources last year. They were 7th in the DVOA grade, but 26th in the PFF team grade for special teams. And then we take a look at the kicker and the punter, taking a 2-year moving average of those guys and their PFF grades. So Blake Grupe comes out as the 20th kicker in the league using that 2-year moving average. It does put a higher weight in the most recent season than it does in the year before that. So Grupe was just kind of bad as a rookie, but was much better in his second season there. So you feel okay about Blake Grupe. The punter, on the other hand, Matthew Hayball, has struggled. He ranks 30th among punters. For the returner grade, the Saints are very average there, 13th to 20th. Rashid Shaheed is set to be both their kick and punt returner. Again, we don't know if he can stay on the field. If you could guarantee me you get a full season of Shaheed, maybe this is even a higher grade here. But Shaheed is a really good punt returner in his history, but hasn't had as much success returning kicks. So, they're in a pretty good spot with their returner there. And then we also factor in just the overall team coach and culture grade that I apply to every team as well, where the Saints have a lot to prove in that regard with this new regime as well. So they rank pretty low for coach and culture. You put all that together and the Saints come out pretty mediocre in terms of their special teams projection at 27th. Obviously, special teams are very, very challenging to predict, and that's really the reason I only give special teams 1% of our final team grade calculation. Not that I think special teams is only 1% of a team's success, but if it's a predictive formula, special teams are essentially random with slight elements of predictability. So you don't want to weigh it too heavily when predicting the team's success. As we take a look at the final team splits, though, for the Saints, a very, very balanced but mediocre football team. C grades across the board. Not a huge surprise. The majority of people were anticipating the Saints to come in with this 32nd ranking here. But just to kind of summarize their strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors or wild card factors here. As we head into the year, their key strengths are two position groups that they might trade away their best players at, linebacker and safety. I think those are two of the better linebacker and safety duos in the league. For whatever it's worth, those are not the most impactful positions on the football field, but they are strengths for the New Orleans Saints for now. Their weaknesses, I think the defining weakness is the lack of star talent. Outside of Chris Olave, who has serious injury concerns, and a 36-year-old linebacker, where are the true difference makers on this football team? They just don't exist. I do list Brandon Staley as a weakness, not to beat a dead horse here, but he does drag down a defensive roster that isn't great, but realistically, Saints roster-wise are probably more 25th, 24th in terms of defensive roster talent, but they still come out as my 32nd ranked defense because I think that lowly of who Brandon Staley is as a defensive coordinator in a league that generally speaking is full of good defensive coordinators. There's just not a lot of eyesores right now at that spot. And then also cornerbacks right now is a weakness. If they do sign Asante Samuel Jr., I would probably remove that from being a weakness. Not that it would be a strength, but I don't know that it would necessarily be a weakness. But yeah, with where Alontae Taylor's at with his coverage and Isaac Yiadom out there, that's pretty weak to look at right now. The wild card factors, obviously the rookie quarterback. Can Tyler Shough be better than the 32nd ranked quarterback in the league? That is going to be their easiest pathway to not being the worst team in football this year, is if Tyler Shough is just a solid rookie. And then there's a lot of health related questions here. The wide receiver health, obviously a huge deal for this team. We talked about that earlier. And then I would say the offensive line is a wild card in the sense that there is a world where that is actually kind of a top 10 to 12 offensive line this year. If some of the young players really come along, obviously the tackle duos, but if Trevor Penning looks good at guard, paired that with, can Eric McCoy stay on the field much more than he did last year? The offensive line is a wild card in the sense that I wouldn't currently list that as a relative strength compared to the rest of the league, but it could be if things go well. And that could help this team shatter the 32nd ranking as well. But let's wrap up by taking a look at the Saints schedule and what their kind of win projection is here. So to be honest, it is a pretty favorable schedule. They did draw the Giants, the Patriots, and the Jets all at home outside of their division, which their division alone is better than it used to be. But, games against like Atlanta and Carolina are going to be still winnable for this Saints team. Even if they rank 32nd, this isn't some horrible, horrible football team. You also drew a handful of road games against, games that you'll be underdogs in, but certainly winnable, at Seattle, at Miami, at Chicago, at Tennessee. I don't look at those, and even like including the Arizona game at home, I don't look at those as unwinnable for this Saints team. So there is a reason their Vegas over-under is rated about 6 wins, even if this is considered one of the worst teams in football. It is interesting that their Super Bowl odds are actually tied for 24th right now. That seems quite high. Like, in terms of Super Bowl odds, I feel like the Saints have about as low of upside as anybody. Like, that seems like quite the stretch. They are, of course, dead last in probability to win their division. Even 8-1 to win this division seems a little bit rich. But because of their schedule not being so hard, the math actually says this team could win a sneaky amount of games. The math actually had it coming out as a projection of 7 wins for this Saints team. That's got to be the highest we've seen for a 32nd ranked team. And I think part of that too is like, there's not really any true bottom feeders this year. But even with the math saying higher than 6 wins, I would have to go against that, gun to my head. I do think this is a team that's going to sell off some veterans, is going to go through their learning curves, and is probably more of a 4 or 5 win team to me that is very likely in contention for the number 1 pick. Though, of course, we've talked about some things that could end up getting them up to that more 7 win mark, maybe is closer to their upside, if you will. But that is going to conclude things on our end of things. I am now going to introduce Nick Underhill, beat writer for the New Orleans Saints, doing awesome work over at NewOrleansFootball.com as well. If you guys do not follow Nick, make sure you do. But I am now going to roll my interview with Nick about the New Orleans Saints. I hope you guys enjoy. Nick, welcome in your rookie year here on the Saints Deep Dive. Really excited to be able to get your incredible insight on the Saints here. First off, how you doing, and where can people find your work?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. I'm happy to be here. I've loved the channel for forever. I think it's one of the better YouTube channels. Love the way you do it. It's just, insightful, and you just do things the right way. And I definitely learn a lot watching you. My stuff's at neworleans.football. You can check it out there. We're on YouTube. We're pretty much anywhere. Just type in neworleans.football. You'll find us.
Awesome. I appreciate that. But, I think one of the harder hitting questions, especially like around the NFL that people have, kind of look at, taking a look at this Saints team and seeing a team that feels like for years, post Drew Brees, post Sean Payton, they've been, maybe not necessarily doing everything they can to rebuild this thing the right way, maybe kicking too much money into future years, signing free agents, this Derek Carr signing. I want to get, your feel kind of being around that organization for as long as you have. Like, does this year feel different to you? Does this feel maybe more like, obviously Mickey Loomis is still there. Does this feel more like, a true maybe multi-year rebuild type of approach from them? Or is that more of just, they got a new coach and Derek Carr retired, so it feels more like that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think they kind of got forced into it a little bit too. I don't know that they necessarily were all on the same page with firing Dennis Allen, but it ended up happening. And they wanted to bring Derek Carr back. And through this weird circumstance, they got the benefit of restructuring his contract and then also getting him off the books as a June 2nd retirement, which allows you to split up that cap charge over 2 years. It was basically they were staring down a barrel. And I think it was either they were keeping them this year and ejecting next year, or you eject now and you have no money to do anything else. And, I kind of looked at Kellen Moore approaching this sort of like it is, Sean Payton did in Denver with Russell, where it was going to be, he's here and then he's gone the next year. Somehow they got it to work out on both ends. And that's a matter of luck than plan, because it couldn't really work out any other way. But, it's kind of weird because my biggest issue with the team, I think, is that they went out and they got Derek Carr and then they stopped spending money as if he were Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady or, Stafford, like an elevator, someone that was going to make everybody better, someone that they were going to win because of. And he's not a win because quarterback. Like, they got him and then kind of almost got cheap a little bit. Like last year, they didn't spend any real money. Chase Young was really the only addition. That's not a massive contract. He's not a difference-making player. They didn't really do anything to make the offense better. They tried to patch together the offensive line with Lucas Patrick and trying to make Trevor Penning work, and they didn't approach it as if it was Derek Carr. Like, you have to help Derek Carr. And but this year, for sure, I think they're all in on the rebuild. Again, I don't think they went into this willingly, but they got there and they're kind of embracing it. I do wonder if they knew about Carr, if they would have signed Justin Reed, because his timeline doesn't really fit up. He's 28. I think he's had 8 years in the league. I don't know that Tyrann Mathieu agrees to redo his contract and come back and be on a losing team. I don't know that Cam Jordan is willing to do a pay cut and come back and be on a losing team. But again, these are all circumstances they were able to take advantage of. And then the Derek Carr thing happens, because otherwise, like, you're probably cutting Cam and then you got a huge cap hit, and that salary isn't going down. Tyrann's salary isn't going down. So I think like a bunch of stuff happened around this that they got really lucky with that kind of helps their process a little bit. But now that they're here, I think, the full embrace is kind of on like, all right, this is where it's at and might as well lean into it.
Yeah. What do they say? Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. So
yeah,
seems kind of exactly what they needed. I've been really asking for them to at least take a year to kind of reset things. So, I'm excited to see the next era kind of open up here. And obviously that's a good transition. This team drafts Tyler Shook with the 40th pick, 41st pick, whatever it is. That's obviously pretty significant draft capital. And at that point, it feels like they had a pretty good idea that Carr was not going to be ready to go for them. So I'm curious, what is their kind of strategy here? Because I think there's two ways to look at it. It's high enough draft capital where you could say, yep, you're the week one starter and really go for it. Like, we're going to give you all the reps. We're going to make sure you are ready. As any rookie, even if he's 25 years old, needs those reps to really be ready. You could look at it that way, or you could say, well, let's do the open competition and let a guy like Rattler compete as well. How high, I guess, do you think they are on Shook? What are his chances of being the week one starter, and how do you see those reps maybe at least early in camp here being distributed?
I think they're really high on him. I think they're really excited about his potential. I think they would have tried to take him at the end of the first round. I think they tried to get back in to the end of the first round to get him even. And then things just kind of played out and they were able to get him at 40. But yeah, I mean, that was kind of their guy the whole time. Like they do the top 30 visits, and usually the top 30 visits are you come in and it's guys that have questions still to answer, and you're going to meet with 4 or 5 different people. It is kind of like going through the car wash of interviews and figuring out how you feel about some of these lingering questions, or it's a medical thing. He came in, went in the room, studied with Kellen Moore. They're up on the board. They're in there alone. Like, they do their whole thing, and then he leaves. So it was kind of like is the chemistry there? Is the thought process there? And like, once it was, I think it was all in toward him. I do think it's going to be a legitimate battle, though, at first, at least in these OTAs. Spencer Rattler got the first team reps last week, looked really, really good, went out there. You see the year of difference, maybe even. And I think you expect that. Like, Shucks,
yeah.
By the time we went out there, was in his 4th practice. Like, it's going to be slower. It's going to take longer to process. There's not going to be as much confidence. And you saw the year of experience Rattler had, and it was just like, he went 8 for 8. Ball's coming out quick. It's on rhythm. Some difficult throws. It was also a little bit illustrative of maybe how bad their secondary is right now. So yeah, but I think it's going to be a real competition. I think Shuck has a real chance of being the week one starter. If he's not, I mean, I would be a little bit concerned about it, because it's not like you're trying to beat out a vet. You're trying to beat out a guy that was picked 150. It's a little bit different, I think. But also, if Shuck's not ready, I don't think you put him out there before he's ready. So, I think it'll be a real battle. I'm excited to see it play out. It feels like refreshing, and they're probably going to be an awful team next year, but at least for right now, like, it feels like there's still a little bit of hope that maybe one of these guys is good. The disappointment will probably come later, but yeah, I think he has a real chance to be the week one starter.
And what were your kind of general thoughts about Shuck and when the Saints took him? What are Nick Underhill's thoughts and takes when that pick comes off the board?
I think when everything's clean, he looks good. Like, when he has protection, he can move. He's 6'3". He's got a good arm. You go back to Oregon, like, he can really run. And then you're kind of like, well, why isn't he running at Louisville? Why'd they take that all out? Were they afraid? Like, I haven't been able to piece that together. I think his 10 best plays are as good as anybody's 10 best plays or 20 best plays. It's when things get messy, like, man, like he has some bad moments and almost comically bad moments at times. There were a few things where he kind of played like a guy that has, stared down the mortality of his football career. And he literally has. And you kind of see that weight on him a little bit. So it's going to be interesting. Like, if they can really protect him and maybe kind of get some of that dialed back, I think he has a chance. There were like 13 throwaways, 14 throwaways I saw last year when I charted. I can't remember the exact number, but it felt extremely high. And again, like, I don't know if he was coached to do that, but it kind of felt like maybe, he was just playing in a way to protect himself. And I kind of get it. His whole NFL dream hinges on like not getting hurt again. If he gets hurt again, it's probably over for him. But that can't be like the defining characteristic of his career. So I think we're probably going to go through the whole summer. There's probably going to be a ton of hype. I think he's going to look amazing when things are clean. And then it's going to be week one when that pass rush is coming out, and we're going to find out what he really is.
Yeah, I thought it was a fun pick. I was a big fan of Shook. Had him, in that kind of second round range. And Yeah, the throwaway point is interesting because before I went in to watch him, I saw his sack pressure to sack rate was like crazy low, like under
Yeah,
10%, which you just don't see. And I think part of that is I do think when he's comfortable, he's got really good pocket presence. He moves around the rush really well. But there's definitely like he is very check down happy. There's even if it's not just check downs, like there was a lot of plays where he's not letting those deeper routes develop too. He's just a little bit eager to take the underneath options. But yeah, I think you're talking about, let's be real. There's a good chance, maybe a good chance, but a somewhat decent chance that the Saints are looking at quarterbacks next year. I love the idea of going for a guy that has the traits, has the upside, will be ready to theoretically show you that right away because of his age. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, well, that's just going to help you get, a top QB next year if someone emerges. So,
hundred percent agree. Yeah, like
yeah,
the investment isn't so high that you can't just cut bait and draft Doug Nussmeier's son next year if you want to. Like whatever it is.
right.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, we're talking about protecting him. So I have some questions about the offensive line, how some things might be shaping up there. I'm seeing that Kelvin Banks is coming out at left tackle right away. Is that locked and loaded? He's going to be their left tackle, or is that more of an early camp thing? We're going to start him there and then play through where our best five is going to be.
I think so. I mean, I think they're willing to try out all five anywhere, however you get them on the field. But I think the best configuration, long-term configuration, is obviously Banks left tackle, Fuaga right tackle. That's where they played in college. Last year, Fuaga was on the left side. So I think getting them back to where their anchor points makes a lot of sense. And look, they've already lost on Trevor Penning. Like that, the value of that does not align.
Right.
You traded up for him. He's not a starting caliber tackle. He might now end up being a guard. Like, and if that's the case, again, huge loss. But if you can get him to play guard and like pull some value out of there, it's a victory outside of what's already been invested in him. And really, I think that's what you're trying to figure out at this point. And with his athleticism, his size, and everything, like I like the idea of him there. I just don't know, and I'll probably be super wrong on this. I thought he was going to be like the end of times for the Saints last year. Like at tackle, I thought.
Yeah.
I did not think he was going to be able to play. I didn't think he was going to be a viable starter, and he ended up being a viable starter. So I'm probably not the most reliable narrator on Trevor Penning's career. I don't know that things happening faster for him on the inside is the answer to his problems, but maybe it is. And if it is,
Yeah.
and he could have an Andrews Pete type, contribution to the team, I think that's a big win for him. And then again, that athleticism, that speed, playing at guard, if he can pull, get down the field, lead the way, I think they have a chance to have a pretty look. I mean, you got a first rounder at both tackles, you got a first rounder at guard, you got another first rounder at the other guard, and a high second rounder at center. Like the barrier here should really be like a top 10 offensive line. Otherwise, like your investments have been terrible. So
Yeah.
I'm holding them to a really high standard there. I think the potential is there. I don't think Ruiz has been what they kind of wanted. Penning obviously hasn't, but I mean, it should be a strength of the team.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I'm excited to see Penning slide in. You mentioned Andrews Pete. That was a thought that, came straight to me because he was for a long time like the only 6'7" guard. And I don't know if he's like a full 6'7" or if he's 6'6.5" or how that all plays out. But we have started to see around the league a lot more guys at that size get opportunities at guard and have some success. Guys like Mekhi Becton last year and Falele for the Ravens. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think we're all a little mad at you, Saints fans, for giving Jalen Carter to the Eagles in that trade. That one's a tough one for everyone to swallow. But yeah, if you can get a little bit of something out of them, that line could really come together with Banks coming in, obviously. So I wanted to ask you about Chris Olave and, kind of what's the panic meter maybe on his durability? What's kind of the if you're not familiar with Chris Olave's durability issues, what's kind of the snapshot story of what's going on there, and how worried are you and Saints fans about his ability to play this year, all season?
I think it's a fair concern. I mean, he's had multiple concussions now, and it's kind of in that spot where it's almost like supersedes like a football concern. Honestly, like the next one is like, man, like is this going to affect his life? It's a fair question. Look, he spent the offseason trying to strengthen his neck to kind of, I don't know exactly, theoretically, I get it. Like maybe your head's not moving around as much anymore. I don't know if that's the answer to the problems. It's scary though, man. It really is. And I'm hoping for the best for him. Like as far as concerns of staying on the field, I mean, I think it's fair. I mean, he's gotten hit every year. Like something kind of happens there. Hopefully, they're designing an offense where maybe he's not as exposed over the middle on some of the stuff. There were a couple tough throws. I thought Carr kind of threw him into a tough spot. I thought Rattler threw him into a tough spot last year. There were the 2 concussions. But that's football at the same time too. So. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, look, I think his talent's unbelievable. I think he's a guy in the right situation that could easily be a 1,300 yard receiver. I don't think he will be with the Saints because it's, so quarterback dependent as well. Yeah. So, I don't know. I don't really know what to project for him. Yeah.
Concussions are tough, man. It really is. As a Packers fan, we have a guy, Romeo Doubs, going through the same thing right now. So totally get it. I have one player on the defense as I was kind of doing my film studies, getting ready for this, that at least in the games I watched looked a little bit better than I was anticipating. That was Alontae Taylor. And, he had like a 30 or 40 PFF coverage grade or so. It was real bad. And he obviously had some really bad games, and it's a volatile position. So it could just be a case of the games I watched were some of his good games. Because I don't get through all 18 of them for this. But anyway, how do you think the Saints feel about Taylor? He's heading into a contract year. Do they view him as a locked-in starter? And then if so, is it in the slot or outside?
Were you watching him early in the season or late? Yeah. Do you remember your early season?
Yeah, with the bad teams, I typically, like when the season's over by week 14 or whatever, I tend to not want to watch those and not put as much weight into those games because I feel like everyone's just together and trying a little bit harder earlier in the year. So it was definitely earlier in the year. I think it was like the Cowboys game.
Yeah.
And then
that makes
week
sense.
4. And then I think the week 11 against, I can't remember the opponent, but I think those were the weeks.
So early in the season, so his career's kind of been interesting. Like it's been like outside, then they had him compete for that spot and he lost it and he moved to the inside and it wasn't great. And then last year he spent the offseason preparing to play in the slot. Early in the season, he's in the slot, looks really dynamic, was covering pretty decently. I don't want to oversell that aspect, but like it was good coverage. But like the blitzing ability, his tackling ability in the run game, like all that stuff was standing out, and I thought was really making him like a really interesting player. I was excited about where he was going in his career, and then injuries happen. He gets moved back out to the outside, and then like some of that volatility comes back into play a little bit. And I thought it got a little bit better. Like at the beginning of that, it was like really rough, and then it kind of rotated back towards the end of the season where it started to look a little bit better. Then things kind of went off the rails a little bit in those last few weeks, just were what they were. But I think that he has a chance, like somewhere in the right role, to be a really, really dynamic playmaker for some team. But it's just kind of, he hasn't settled into a spot. They were using him outside, inside at the first OTA. And again, like he's on the inside, they got him blitzing. Like it's, you see stuff there. It looks really good. Mm-hmm. They've had an eye on Asante Samuel Jr. I wonder if they get him, like, you put him, on the outside, Alontae becomes your slot player. If not, like, is it base downs? He's on the outside. Then when you go to nickel, he moves to the inside, and then Adams on the outside. I think that might be an option. But like, I think his best spot in his future is in that slot position, and I think that makes him interesting with Staley is the DC. Like we've seen him do really interesting things with slot players previously. Ramsey being, one of them, kind of made him really dynamic there. I think Taylor, like if you can use him in that multifaceted role, has a chance to be a dynamic player for a defense.
Yeah, he definitely stands out, like just from a play strength perspective and the way he wants to hit. You don't get that from a ton of DBs. So like that's definitely what stood out to me was, blowing up bubble screens and contributing in that phase. So I'm hopeful they can keep him in the slot. I definitely didn't see as much on the outside, like you said, and the Samuel signing would be perfect because like you don't really want Samuel out there on like early downs because he is a liability against the run. So maybe you would see like Taylor outside and then Samuel comes in for nickel. But cool. All right. So my final question here is obviously this is our first deep dive here. They're going to come in 32nd in the power rankings. Woof, I know, but I don't think it's a surprise to too many people. Would you be surprised if the Saints were like sellers at the deadline this year. If they're sitting there at 3-9 and kind of continuing to react to, like we opened the show with the Derek Carr retirement, kind of changing their philosophy here. Do you think it's likely or possible for guys like Demario Davis, Tyrann Mathieu, maybe someone like Chris Olave? If I would be curious your thoughts on if they would consider moving him with his injury record, or is someone like Demario Davis just too much of a Saints franchise linchpin to trade like that midseason?
Well, first of all, I don't think the rankings they don't have a quarterback on the team that's ever won a game. So, I mean, like, how do you really rank them right now? You know what I mean? So I get it.
Did Kellen Moore win any games?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I got to look that up. That's a good stat.
Just put him in.
It's a crazy quarterback room though. I think I got I'd say 5 is probably the win total I'm kind of looking at. It's just like hard to like pick less than 5 wins, like when you go through a last place schedule, but they could be really, really bad. So like, I think they're in a position where they got to prove everybody wrong. And yeah, I think that's fair. Totally fair ranking. I could see them being sellers at the deadline. Like if it's cooked, like what is the value of some of these guys staying on your team? Like at that point, I think you're even doing them a favor of, ushering some of these guys out of here. So absolutely, I could see it at the deadline. I don't think the Chris Olave trade rumors make sense right now, but again, at the deadline, like if you're in a terrible situation, yeah, it makes sense. And you might be able to see what else you have at receiver. Trading them before you ever play a game and taking away the one guy that is going to consistently get open for a quarterback you're trying to develop doesn't make a lot of sense, but perspective changes by October. So yeah, I could absolutely see them being sellers by then. And if your quarterback situation is hopeless by then, and you don't have them on the team, I mean, I think you're trying to get rid of everybody and just stock assets at that point.
Yeah, it's kind of you don't see a ton of it's not like MLB where every year talking about buyers and sellers at the deadline. I feel like football, people are usually trying to go for it. But yeah, Saints are kind of in a unique case where they're an old team in a transition season. So it could be kind of a outlier year at the deadline to keep an eye on there. So all right, that's all I got for you. You got any other thoughts, any other pieces of work coming out that people got to look forward to?
No, I mean, we just kind of, go around the clock covering these guys. There's really no off season over here. We putting out like 10 pieces of content a week, even in the off season. Thank God they were a dysfunctional mess this off season, because like it kept the ball rolling pretty easily. But things are getting it's just it's funny because like the outside perspective of this team, I think, is probably more negative than it's ever been. But then like within the borders of the Gulf Coast, like it feels better than it ever has. I think like since Drew left, like it was just so due for the reset and the restart. But yeah, look, 32 makes sense to me. Like I can't tell you you're wrong on that one.
All right. No, I have not envied being in the shoes of a Saints fan the last few years. So I'm glad the sun is starting to rise for you guys. You can get a glimmer of hope out there. But thank you so much, Nick. This was great. Really, great insight added to the deep dive for sure. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And there we have it. There is our first deep dive of this 2025 NFL offseason. Really hope you guys enjoyed. Again, if you did, please do hit that like button. Let me know your comments down below, Saints fans. If I missed any key information or anything like that, would love to get that insight from you guys. Let me know in the comments down below. Let me know what you think about the ranking as well. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And of course, who do you think comes in with the number 31 spot coming up next in this deep dive series? The rate of these videos is probably going to be about every 4 days or so. So that's what you guys have to look forward here on the channel. Make sure you're subscribed. And that is all we've got for now. I will see you soon. Thank you for watching. Peace out.